Good evening, and welcome. Tonight we're settling in with Howling Dark, the second book in Christopher Ruocchio's Sun Eater series. If you're just getting comfortable, take a moment, adjust your pillow, let your shoulders drop, and breathe. Now then, when we last left Hadrian Marlowe, he had survived something extraordinary on the world of Amesh, something that earned him a name whispered across the stars. Half-mortal. A Palatine son turned fugitive turned legend, whether he wanted that title or not. 48 years have slipped by in the cold silence of cryogenic sleep. Though Hadrian himself has aged only 12, the galaxy has moved on without him, and not kindly. 13 colonies have fallen to the Cielcin, an alien threat that grows bolder with every passing decade. Hadrian now serves aboard the Pharaoh as part of a quiet imperial mission, searching the far reaches of known space for a place called Vorgossos, and for any chance of peace with an enemy that seems to want none. It's a story of vast distances and quiet determination, of a man carrying the weight of a title he never asked for, drifting between the stars with a purpose he can barely hold on to. There will be strange worlds and stranger people, old wounds and new alliances, and always, always the slow pull of something larger than himself drawing him forward. So settle in, let the hum of starship engines fill the silence around you, and let's begin. Hadrian Marlowe is waking from a very long sleep, and so, in a way, is this story. Hadrian Marlowe wakes from Fugue, that deep cryogenic sleep used for interstellar travel, and his mind is a storm of fragmented memories. Faces of the dead drift before him. Bordelon, the Norman commodore who betrayed them on Pharos, Gilliam, and the Cielcin warrior Uvenari. For a moment he even sees his beloved tutor Gibson, gone now for years, standing at his bedside like a ghost. But it's only Dr. Okoyo tending to him, flushing the violet suspension fluid from his veins aboard the Pharaoh. The year is 16219, 48 years since Amesh, though Hadrian has lived only 12 of them, the rest lost to the frozen silence between the stars. Commodore Bassander Lin, the Imperial captain who serves as the public face of their operation, delivers grim news. Their mercenary outfit, the Meidua Red Company, is really a front for an Imperial mission to find the mysterious world of Vorgossos and negotiate peace with the Cielcin. But 13 colonies have been destroyed while they've searched, millions dead, and Lin's patience has worn dangerously thin. There is, however, a lead. A woman named Corvo has located someone called Samir, who works for a figure known only as the Painted Man, an extrasolarian arms dealer who might know the way to Vorgossos. Hadrian insists he must lead the away team himself, since only he or Lin can properly represent the Empire, and they certainly can't risk Lin. Their argument reveals the tension simmering between them, Lin viewing this entire mission as a punishment post, Hadrian clinging to the belief that peace with even one Cielcin clan could change everything. As their shuttle descends toward the Balmung, Hadrian glimpses the scarred face of Rustum below, a planet gutted by Cielcin attack. 2 million dead, a black wound visible from orbit that reminds him precisely why this mission matters. Hadrian makes his way to the Cubiculum, that freezing cold chamber aboard the Balmung, where 11 captured Cielcin sleep in cryogenic creches. He lingers beside the container holding Tanaran, their leader, a priest or noble of some kind who agreed to this plan back on Amesh, and he whispers a quiet promise. "We're nearly there, you're going home." But it's Valka who finds him there, not the captain he was expecting. Valka Ondera, the Tavrosi xenologist with her forbidden neural implant and her sharp golden eyes, and she's frustrated. Years have passed with no progress, no new information, and Bassander Lin won't even let her thaw a single Cielcin to study. Hadrian calms her with the news that changes everything, that Krim has found a contact on the planet below who might lead them to the Extrasolarians. Her whole demeanour shifts at this, hope returning to her face for the first time in what feels like ages. They share a moment of warmth amid all the tension, practicing their Cielcin language together, teasing each other gently. In the corridors, Hadrian encounters his centurions Polino and Gen, loyal veterans of the Red Company, who direct him to Captain Jinan in the Ventral Observatory. And here we see a different side of Hadrian entirely. Jinan is his anchor, his lover, a Jadian soldier of 30 years who commands their allied forces. Their reunion is tender and unhurried. She admits she understands the doubts that plague Lyn and Valka, but she isn't ready to give up. Those words heal something in Hadrian that nothing else quite reaches, and for a brief moment the weight of 48 years and 13 lost colonies feels almost bearable. Hadrian leads a small team down to the surface of Rustum, the very planet they've been orbiting, scarred and broken by the Cielcin attack that killed 2 million people. What they find below is Arslan, a city that isn't really a city at all. It's dozens of massive starships, grounded permanently on the surface, rough-welded together with bridges and cable cars and balconies, forming a sprawling warren of metal and steam. These ships will never fly again. Their own weight would tear them apart if they tried. And so they've become buildings, homes, a desperate improvisation of shelter for the survivors. Hadrian takes only a small party with him, Switch, the Norman pilot Ilex, and Bassander's prickly executive officer Greenlaw, while Gen and the soldiers wait at the shuttle as backup. They push through streets thick with holographic advertisements, drug smoke, and the prayer calls of the Chantry, until they find Krim waiting for them near the massive Nipponese supercarrier called the Murakami. Krim, their operative, has been living undercover here for months, and he's arranged a meeting with a man called Samir, a plagiarius, a smuggler who serves as intermediary to the mysterious figure known as the Painted Man. They find Samir in a Jubala den, a grossly obese and unsettling man with close-set eyes and a predator's instincts hidden beneath soft flesh. Hadrian maintains his cover story, claiming to be a disinherited mining heir turned mercenary captain seeking to buy atomics, but Samir sees through the surface almost immediately, recognizing Hadrian's palatine breeding in his very skin. The verbal sparring is tense and careful, Samir probing, Hadrian deflecting, each measuring the other like wolves circling. In the end, Samir agrees to arrange a meeting with the Painted Man, but warns them the Chantry's influence over Arslan's fragile government makes caution essential. Whatever comes next, they're stepping deeper into dangerous territory. Hadrian and his team follow Samir to meet the Painted Man, and the venue itself is the first surprise. Not some grimy underworld den, but a stately Nipponese-style tea house perched on the edge of a grounded starship, open to the afternoon sky. It feels terribly exposed for a black market arms dealer, almost deliberately public. Then the Painted Man appears, and Hadrian understands why secrecy isn't necessary. The creature is a homunculus, but nothing like the gentle Ilex. Its skin is translucent porcelain veined with blue, its eyes are entirely black with no whites at all, and when it smiles it reveals 100 teeth behind lips painted blood red. Animated tattoos drift beneath its skin, eyes and mouths that open and close of their own accord. It is designed, quite deliberately, to inspire primal dread. Hadrian drops his cover story about wanting atomics and reveals what he truly seeks, the location of Vorgossos, the mythical world where extrasolarians trade with the Cielcin. The Painted Man's reaction is telling. A flash of genuine surprise it tries to hide behind theatrical distraction. It reveals that Vorgossos is a sunless planet, impossible to find without its lord's permission, a figure called the Undying. But then it sees through Hadrian completely, calling him an imperial spy, and terminates the meeting. When Gen springs the ambush with soldiers vaulting over the railing, something truly unsettling happens. Every patron in the tea house rises as one in perfect, eerie silence. Ordinary people moments before, now controlled like puppets. The Painted Man taps its temple and warns Hadrian, "You don't know what we are!" What follows is one of the most brutal encounters Hadrian has faced, the moment the Painted Man's true nature is revealed. Those patrons in the tea house, the quiet diners sitting at their tables, they aren't people anymore. They're daemon-augmented slaves, human bodies threaded with wires, tubing and ceramic components, controlled like puppets by the Painted Man's will. When they attack, they do so in perfect, eerie silence, and Hadrian's team finds itself outnumbered 5-1 against enemies that simply will not stop. Hadrian cuts through them with his high matter sword, that impossible blade that meets no resistance in flesh or steel, and discovers the horrifying truth beneath the skin, metal where muscle should be, white fluid mingling with blood on the floorboards. These machine puppets keep moving even when dismembered, legs stumbling after severed torsos, hands still clawing and grasping. 2 of Hadrian's soldiers are killed in the fighting, torn apart by creatures that bite and claw with mechanical relentlessness. Hadrian sends Gen downstairs to secure an escape route, but Gen, that enormous, fierce-hearted centurion from the Colosseum days, he never comes back up. Hadrian finds him in the foyer, the 2 machine women he'd torn apart with his bare hands lying broken around him, but a plasma blast has burned a hole clean through his back. And then, the painted man reveals its most terrifying ability. It has shape-shifted into one of Hadrian's own soldiers, a perfect disguise that let it get close enough to stun him. The last thing Hadrian sees before darkness takes him is his own Peltast's face melting away, features narrowing, skin turning porcelain pale, black eyes gleaming with a 100-toothed smile. Hadrian awakens as a prisoner in the painted man's private cable car, his legs paralyzed from the stunner blast, swaying high above the streets of Arslan. The homunculus taunts him, dangling his own sword and casually revealing it destroyed nearly all its controlled puppets in the fight. But the cruelest torment comes when the painted man shifts its entire body into the likeness of dead Gen, that rough, loyal centurion who fell in the foyer below, speaking in almost his voice, wearing almost his grin. Hadrian has to close his eyes against it, yet he keeps the creature talking, because his palatine nervous system is recovering faster than any ordinary person's, feeling slowly returning to his useless legs. Through their exchange, Hadrian learns something vital. The painted man escaped from Vorgossos, where imperial palatines once came as secret pilgrims seeking forbidden things. Immortality, transformation, custom-built slaves, anything the Empire's laws denied them. The creature was made there, shaped body and soul by some magus for purposes it won't name. Hadrian compares it to Shelley's Frankenstein, a monster spurned by its creator, and that literary provocation buys him just enough time. The moment his legs obey him, he seizes a heavy meteor from the display table and smashes it into the painted man's face, then crushes its skull with a munitions crate. He recovers his sword, his shield belt, and crucially the creature's silver terminal device, that strange disc it had wired directly into its brain. Then he cuts open the cable car door and leaps into the open air above Arslan, free but utterly alone. After killing the painted man and leaping from that cable car high above the city, Hadrian finds himself alone in the streets of Arslan, bloodied, without his coat or terminal, with no way to contact his fleet. He catches sight of himself in a rain barrel and barely recognizes the young man staring back, something aged and haunted lurking behind his eyes, the faces of everyone he's killed peering out from within his own. It's here that a childhood lesson from his scoliast Gibson surfaces, a memory from when Hadrian was just 8 years old and had stolen into the chamber where his grandmother's body lay. Gibson had told him then that grief is deep water, that you cannot deny what you feel but must learn to float with it rather than let it pull you under. Hadrian steadies himself with those words, finds a holography booth, and reaches Jinan, learning with overwhelming relief that everyone else survived: Switch, Krim, Ilex, even Greenlaw. He waits in a small cafe beneath the hull of a grounded freighter, eating a simple bowl of noodles in silence, until Jinan arrives wearing his coat and carrying her steady warmth with her. He tells her he killed the painted man, and then they walk out together into the cold Rustum night, arm in arm, 2 armed lovers sharing a moment of quiet tenderness, before the grief and the mission close back in around them. Back aboard the Pharaoh, the captains gather around Bordelon's old marble conference table to take stock of the Rustum mission, and the mood is grim. Bassander Lin is furious, pacing and shouting that they have nothing to show for their efforts but 4 dead men. He wants to abandon the search for Vorgossos entirely and return to the Imperial fleet at Koratani, where First Strategos Hauptmann is mustering forces. The news from the front is devastating. The Empire has lost the planet Tyrus completely, House Jernau destroyed, 7 million people dead. Bassander lays that weight at Hadrian's feet, calling him a palatine lunatic chasing fairy stories. Ottavia Corvo, the towering Norman mercenary captain, refuses outright to risk her ship in pitched battle, threatening to leave the company altogether. And then comes the blow Hadrian never expected. Jinan, his anchor, his steady light through all of this, sides with Bassander. She suggests they telegraph the intelligence home and await orders rather than pressing forward. The betrayal leaves Hadrian feeling as though he's fallen through thin ice into freezing water. He fights back the only way he can, producing the painted man's recovered terminal and laying it on the table like a card he's been holding in reserve. He argues passionately that Vorgossos is real, that the Cielcin themselves knew of it, that this terminal may contain coordinates to March Station or Vorgossos itself. But the room has already shifted against him. A compromise emerges. They will hold position and telegraph Knight-Tribune Smythe for orders before committing to anything. Afterward, Jinan finds Hadrian in the corridors, and he finally tells her why he killed the painted man, that it wore Gen's face after murdering him. She holds him close, but something has cracked between them. He pushes her away gently and chooses to sleep alone, the first visible fracture in a relationship that had been his one sure thing. Hadrian retreats to the Balmung to escape Bassander Lin's presence, and there, surrounded by the people who matter most to him, he hosts a quiet dinner in the executive dining room. Switch and Paulino have cooked together, pasta with mushrooms and a roast, and the conversation drifts naturally to Bassander's failings as a leader, Paulino calling him the sort of officer who thinks using dead comrades for sandbags is glorious. Jinan defends Bassander, reminding them he's exhausted and acting on the intelligence he has, while Valka cuts in with dry wit, observing that military intelligence can make up for the other kind, but Lin is short on both. The easy banter gives way to something heavier when Hadrian sets down his fork and addresses the empty chair at their table. He eulogizes Gen, telling the others he died bravely, pulling two of those machine creatures apart before going down the stairs on Hadrian's order. It's a lie, or rather a kindness. Hadrian chooses to valorize Gen's final moments, rather than reveal the ugly truth of how the painted man shot him in the back while wearing a friend's face. What follows is something rather beautiful. One by one, each person shares a fond memory of Gen, his shameless hat-wearing, the fake love notes he left for Switch in the Colosseum, the bar brawl on Ardistama, where he tossed grown men about like sacks of flour. Laughter mingles with tears, and Hadrian reflects on something profound, that fables are more real than reality, that the stories we tell about the dead shape them more truly than the clinical facts of how they fell. It's a lesson he'll carry forward, understanding that legends, including his own, must sometimes be larger than the truth to serve their purpose. Back in Jinan's quarters aboard the Balmung, surrounded by the little touches that have made the captain's suite her own, a silk curtain from a Pharos bazaar, a ceramic basin for her morning rituals, Hadrian tries to talk about what happened at the council meeting, but Jinan kisses him before he can finish his sentence. When he finally steers the conversation to Bassander and the vote, their exchange turns raw and revealing. Jinan asks him plainly why peace matters so much, and Hadrian lays himself bare. He speaks of the Bastille in Borisevo, of watching the Chantry torture a Cielcin captain, of the plague-ridden streets where good people suffered and no one helped. He tells her that soldiers like Switch and Paulino and all the rest deserve better than a lifetime of endless war, and that if he can broker peace with even one Cielcin clan, it might unlock something larger. Then he goes further, kneeling before her and speaking of a future together in Jad, where Palatine genetic codes might be undone and they could start a family. It is a beautiful, desperate fantasy, and Jinan receives it with a sad smile. She loves him, she says, and he loves her. But the unspoken truth hangs between them. If they return to the Imperial fleet, their time together ends. For now, though, they choose each other, and the war and all its weight falls away for one brief, private night. The narrator's older voice reminds us with quiet sorrow that nothing beautiful lasts forever. Hadrian and Switch shuttle over to the Mistral, the smallest and fastest of their three ships, because Siran has finally been brought out of cryogenic sleep, and Hadrian owes her the truth about Gen's death. On the way, he confides something raw and unplanned to Switch. He's losing Jinan. If they return to the Imperial fleet at Koritani, She'll sail back to her satrap's forces while Hadrian gets folded into the 437th Legion, and their time together simply ends. He edges towards suggesting they go renegade, take the ships and pursue Vorgossos without Imperial permission, but a pilot officer sits just beyond the bulkhead, and the Empire is always listening. So the words die unspoken. Aboard the Mistral, they learn that Ilex and Valka have made no progress, cracking the Painted Man's encrypted terminal. Then, Hadrian faces Siran, and she refuses to accept comfortable half-truths. She demands to know exactly how Gen died, and so he tells her everything. The daemon-controlled soldiers, the ambush, the Painted Man stealing Gen's face, and how Hadrian crushed the creature's skull to avenge him. Siran receives it all with fierce dignity, and pours vodka to send Gen off properly. But it's her parting insight that matters most. She asks Hadrian a question so obvious he'd never considered it. Why not go over Bassander Lin's head and appeal directly to Knight-Tribune Smythe, who outranks him? The idea lands like a spark in dry kindling, and for the first time since the failed council vote, Hadrian sees a way forward. The captains convene once more to review what Ilex has recovered from the Painted Man's encrypted terminal, and the news is both promising and disappointing. The star charts reveal 17 extrasolarian outposts scattered across the Vale and the Expanse, including March Station, but there are no coordinates for Vorgossos itself. Hadrian seizes on this as progress, arguing they should press on to March Station, but Bassander Lin declares the mission a failure and insists they return to the Imperial fleet at Koritani. What follows is the fiercest confrontation yet between these two men, Hadrian pleading for the prisoners and a ship, Bassander dismissing every achievement they've built together. Hadrian appeals to something deeper, arguing passionately that the Cielcin can be understood, that peace is possible, that language and reason can bridge the gap between species. The narrator's older voice, however, gently warns us that Hadrian was wrong about this, that the gulf between human and Cielcin runs far deeper than he imagined. When Hadrian turns to Jinan, desperate for her support, she sides with Bassander, ruling they go to Koritani. The words fall like a blade. Then Ottavia Corvo announces she'll take the Mistral and leave the company entirely, nearly coming to blows with Bassander over the ship's ownership. Jinan brokers an uneasy compromise. Normans may choose whom to follow, and the fleet will separate without bloodshed. But the fractures now run too deep to mend. And now we find Hadrian alone in his cabin aboard the Pharaoh, balancing on a knife's edge. He has already spoken secretly with Knight-Tribune Smythe, exchanging messages via telegraph from the Mistral, where Bassander was least likely to intercept them. Smythe has offered him something remarkable, a paper shield. She cannot overrule Bassander's orders, which come from First Strategos Hauptmann himself, but she can order Hadrian to continue pursuing Vorgossos regardless, accepting that if it fails, she alone will face the court-martial. It is a tremendous act of faith in a man she barely knows. Alone in the dark, Hadrian recites the 8 forms of obedience that his old tutor Gibson once taught him, turning each one over in his mind like stones in his hand. Fear, loyalty, piety, compassion, devotion. He examines what drives Bassander and sees a man who obeys the office, the rank, the structure of the legion, someone who needs that external order to hold back the chaos within himself. And then Hadrian turns that same scrutiny inward, questioning his own motivations with painful honesty. Is it compassion that drives him toward peace, or pride, or greed for glory? He cannot fully say, but he knows he has a talent no one else possesses, the ability to speak with the Cielcin, and he feels a deep, almost primal need to use it. With his decision made and Smythe's secret orders tucked safely in his back pocket, Hadrian sets his conspiracy in motion. He slips aboard the Mistral under the guise of inspecting personnel transfers and finds Captain Ottavia Corvo in the ready room with Valka. Without preamble, he asks Corvo to take him to March Station and help him steal Tanaran from the Balmung. It's a bold request, made bolder by the fact that he has no money to pay her. Hadrian plays the negotiation beautifully. He opens by asking for 6 or 7 fugue pods, knowing full well Corvo will refuse, then gracefully settles for just the one Cielcin he actually needs. It's a trick worthy of any merchant prince, letting her believe she's talked him down. The plan itself is elegantly simple. During the chaos of personnel transfers between the 3 ships, a small team will board the Balmung, wake Tanaran so it can walk out under its own power, and escape to the Mistral before anyone realizes what's happened. Then Valka surprises everyone by volunteering to join the heist, offering to disable the ship's security cameras using her neural lace implant, in exchange for finally getting to study the Cielcin up close. And quietly, almost as an aside, Hadrian reveals that he and Jinan are finished, and that his oldest friend Switch has already smuggled his most precious belongings off the Pharaoh. The conspiracy is set, the team assembled, and the breaking of the Red Company has truly begun. Hadrian's conspiracy unfolds aboard the Balmung with the quiet precision of a well-rehearsed play. His team splits up the moment they land in the cargo bay. Siran and Krim head straight for the cubiculum, where Tanaran sleeps in cryogenic storage, while Valka slips away to her old cabin, though her real task is using her neural lace to disable the ship's security cameras from within. Hadrian himself puts on a convincing performance for the dockmaster Brux, spinning a casual story about ferrying his belongings back to the Pharaoh. Everything proceeds smoothly until the one encounter he dreaded most. Jinan appears in the corridor, and worse still, Bassander is with her, just down the hall from where Krim and Siran are working to extract the Cielcin prisoner. Hadrian improvises beautifully, explaining away Dr. Okoyo's presence, chatting about the fleet's separation at Koritani, all while his heart is breaking, because this is goodbye, and only he knows it. He kisses Jinan one last time, a kiss that promises a future he knows will never come, while Bassander watches with something unexpected in his expression, shame, for what his decisions have cost them. Then Hadrian turns and walks toward the cubiculum without looking back, carrying the weight of a betrayal that will shatter everything these 3 people shared. Deep in the Balmung's cubiculum, surrounded by mist and cold, Hadrian watches Dr. Okoyo work to revive Tanaran from cryogenic sleep. The process is delicate and uncertain. The doctor has never thawed a Cielcin before, and she makes no secret of her unease. The suspension fluid drains away, blood cycles back into the alien's veins, and Hadrian stands over the opening creche like a necromancer raising something from the dead. When the lid lifts, he sees Tanaran lying naked and slick with purplish slime, corpse-white and pierced with tubes, its twin hearts beating in that strange double rhythm. He lays a hand on its face, feeling warmth return, and the creature jerks awake, scrabbling blindly before its enormous black eyes find his. Tanaran's first question is whether they found its master, Prince Aranata, and Hadrian sidesteps with a careful half-truth, saying only that he'll explain once they reach the other ship. He helps the disoriented Cielcin dress in its dark robes, pulls the deep hood down to hide its face, and leads it through the corridors with Krim and Switch ahead and Siran guarding the rear. A technician spots them, and Krim stuns the man without hesitation, but the real trouble comes when Lieutenant Hannes and 6 Jadian soldiers block their path, weapons drawn. Just as surrender seems inevitable, stunner bolts fly from a side passage, and Paulino and Alara emerge in company reds, having been recruited by Valka after she disabled the cameras. Paulino drops the shielded Hannes with a single devastating punch, but not before the lieutenant triggers the ship's alarm. As klaxons blare red through the corridors, Hadrian catches Valka's eye in the doorway and mouths a silent thank you. Then together, all of them press forward toward the cargo bay, and whatever comes next. With alarms shrieking through the Balmung's corridors, Hadrian's team races toward the cargo bay, Siran leading the charge and showing little mercy to anyone who stands in their way. Most of the crew they pass are unarmed technicians bewildered by the commotion, though their confusion turns to stunned silence when they catch a glimpse of what moves beneath that heavy hood. The real obstacle comes at the bay doors themselves, sealed shut by alarm protocol, until Valka steps forward and works her particular magic through the security terminal. Not with any dramatic flourish, but with a quiet concentration that simply makes the panel go dark before the massive doors grind open. Inside the hangar, 30 soldiers have scrambled into position among the crates and shuttlecraft, and Hadrian finds himself pinned down with no clear path to their shuttle. So he climbs. Up on the catwalks where the sparrowhawk lighters hang like sleeping bats, he slashes their power conduits with his high matter sword and drops the massive craft onto the deck below, scattering soldiers with the force of falling thunder. 3 men die beneath that first ship, and something shifts irreversibly inside Hadrian as he hears their screams. Then Bassander Lin appears on the catwalk behind him, sword drawn, and they fight. It's a brutal, evenly matched duel between 2 high matter blades, each strike hissing and spitting strange vapours where the exotic matter meets resistance for once. Bassander batters Hadrian to the ground with a headbutt and stands over him, insisting this isn't a story and Hadrian isn't a hero. But Switch fires a stunner into Bassander's face from behind, and Hadrian rises to sever the captain's sword hand and beat him into submission. He claims Went's sword as spoils and staggers toward the shuttle, only to hear Jinan's voice behind him, sharp with Jadian fury. She fires again and again, bullets crumpling harmlessly against his shield, but her final words cut deeper than any blade. "Ti abatre," she screams as the hatch seals between them. "I loved you," past tense. The Red Company is broken beyond repair. 7 years have passed in the cold sleep of Fugue since Hadrian fled the Balmung, with Jinan's anguished cry still ringing in his ears, and now he stands shivering on the bridge of the Mistral, wrapped in a blanket, watching the universe unfold as they drop out of warp near a frigid blue supergiant star. Below them, an immense accretion disk churns with the raw materials of unborn worlds, and among those cosmic nursery fires, blue sparks flicker, the drive glow of extra-Solarian mining ships trawling for heavy elements. They found what they came looking for. While Hadrian slept, Valka and Tanaran have been awake for weeks. And Valka has done something remarkable, learning to speak Cielcin while teaching the alien Galstani in return, trading languages for knowledge of the Cielcin gods, the quiet. When Otavia finally makes contact with the station and brings Tanaran to the bridge, the Norman captain shows her particular brand of fearlessness, striding right up to the 8-foot Xenobite and extending her hand, introducing herself as Commodore of the Red Company. The station itself is a ring city 600 miles across, orbiting just above the accretion disk, invisible except in infrared and ultraviolet, a hidden civilization thriving in the cracks of the Imperium. Hadrian reflects on how thin humanity's hold on the stars truly is, recalling the old cartographer's warning at the edges of their maps. Here, there be dragons. Hadrian and his small team, Switch, Siran and Krim, step off the Mistral and into March Station, and nothing could have prepared them for what they find. Rain falls inside the enormous ring city. Holographic advertisements shimmer through the downpour in 6 languages, and the streets are filled with people who have remade themselves with machines. Glowing implants beneath their skin, arms of jointed steel, glass cables threaded between bodies like luminous tendons. Hadrian, raised in an empire that considers such modifications abominations, fights a visceral horror that borders on prayer, reciting the old litany against machine corruption, even as he forces himself to remember that Valka carries her own neural implant, and these are still human beings underneath. Before disembarking, he'd told Otavia something revealing. If the mission fails, she must leave him here, because he cannot return to the Empire without success. Otavia refused, reminding him that her worlds are burning in this war too. Now, adrift in this alien city with no clear plan, the group debates how to find passage to Vorgossos. Krim, familiar with extrasolarian culture, suggests Hadrian use his Palatine identity as cover, since nobles commonly visit such places seeking the forbidden life extension therapies the Chantry prohibits, a suggestion that carries uncomfortable echoes of what the Painted Man told them back on Rostam. Switch and Siran eye the augmented crowds with deep suspicion, while Hadrian recognizes the hard truth that Vorgossos, a place found only by those its ruler wishes to find, will not yield its secrets easily. Hadrian and his small team spend the day visiting Bonecutter clinics across March Station, searching for information about Vorgossos. The Bonecutters are everywhere in this strange city, offering every imaginable modification to the human body. New skin, new organs, new memories, even a complete change of sex. Hadrian is deeply unsettled by all of it, seeing in this marketplace of flesh the same commodification he despised back home in his family's treatment of their servants. At the 5th clinic, Cento's Biotechnic, they meet Yevgeny Cento, a rat-faced Lothrian geneticist with gunmetal teeth and a monocular implant where one eye should be. Cento immediately identifies Hadrian as Palatine from his height and bearing alone, and puts on quite a performance of broken speech and theatrical charm. Hadrian introduces himself as Gibson, borrowing his dead tutor's name, and steers the conversation toward what he truly seeks, not cosmetic improvements or longer life, but a cure for death itself, the legendary gift said to exist on Vorgossos. At the mention of that name, Cento's entire persona drops away, the exaggerated accent smooths, the showmanship vanishes, replaced by genuine fear. He explains that Vorgossos is ruled by someone called the Undying, and can only be reached through the Exalted, those post-human beings so merged with machines they are barely recognizable. Cento cannot provide the location himself, but he directs Hadrian toward the docks, toward shipping companies and traders who serve as Vorgossos contacts, people who know the right ships. Hadrian offers payment for a specific name. Cento's name opens a door for Hadrian and his team, leading them to a freight lift district on March Station, where gulls wheel beneath an artificial sky and green water laps against concrete pilings. Their destination is the office of Antonius Brevin, a merchanter who arranges passage to Vorgossos. Brevin's reception area is staffed by Eva, a homunculus receptionist whose 2 large eyes and mincing clockwork movements betray her engineered nature, designed for docility and unable even to run. Brevin himself appears grandfatherly at first glance, white-haired and smiling, but his handshake reveals skeletal prosthetic fingers beneath silk gloves, and when he removes his dark glasses, his eyes are blank curves of dead metal, like coins placed on a corpse. He confirms he can arrange transport aboard something called an Exalt Sojourner, a vessel so vast it would carry Hadrian's entire ship inside it, but the price is 100,000 marks. Hadrian cannot afford it, and when Brevin suggests purchasing his Palatine blood instead, his rare imperial genetics, Hadrian refuses flatly, sickened by the thought of his genome being used to create enslaved homunculi like Eva. But then Hadrian makes a morally compromising counteroffer. He proposes trading Cielcin blood instead, Tanaran's blood, upcast xenobiological material that isn't truly his to give. Brevin accepts, framing the value as pharmaceutical research rather than flesh trading. Hadrian knows what he's done, spending what belongs to someone else to buy his way forward, and the narrator's voice carries a weight of quiet shame, listing the dark places throughout history where people decided the ends justified the means. Back aboard the Mistral, Hadrian braces himself for his companion's reaction to the blood deal, expecting outrage, but Valka simply laughs, and Captain Corvo calls it a fair bargain at no real cost. Hadrian alone carries the weight of what he's done, haunted by the memory of Brevin's homunculus Eva, and what extrasolarian flesh peddlers might create with alien genetic material. Valka challenges him directly, pointing out he's done worse things, and Hadrian fires back with unexpected force, insisting he never personally owned slaves and that whatever creatures are produced from this blood will exist because of him. It's a rare flash of moral clarity from a man who has learned to compromise, and Valka, perhaps seeing something in him she hadn't expected, quietly relents. Then comes the harder task. Hadrian descends to the brig to ask Tanaran for the blood sample directly. The Cielcin's refusal is immediate and deeply felt, for Tanaran is Baton, a keeper of sacred tradition, and the word carries the weight of mountain roots and ancient foundations. To defile the Baton is to defile an entire people. Hadrian presses gently but honestly, admitting the blood could be used to make weapons, refusing to lie even when it would be easier. In the end, Tanaran surrenders with quiet dignity, baring its throat and extracting only one promise, that Hadrian never reveal this to its people. As black blood fills the ampule, Hadrian pledges it will see Tanaran home. Following Brevin's coordinates, the Mistral pulls away from March Station and heads out into the dark, descending below the ecliptic plane toward a rendezvous point where their exalted transport ship should be waiting. The crew is uneasy. First Officer Duran voices what everyone is thinking. That passage bought with a single vial of blood feels too easy, too much like a trap. Captain Corvo keeps the warp drive primed and orders Krim's security team to stand ready. Hadrian passes the hours in quiet conversation with Ilex, the Dryad, who grew up on ships like these and has actually encountered the Exalted before. She warns him plainly, they're barely even human anymore. When they finally reach the coordinates, the sensors show nothing at all. No ship, no heat signature, not even a gravitational reading. Then comes a sound that sends a chill through the crew, a steady banging on the starboard airlock, from outside where nothing should be. Hadrian rushes down to join Polino's armed security team, and when they finally open the doors, what enters is something none of them have seen before. A creature of articulated metal arms and glowing red eyes, bullet-shaped and spider-like, projecting the holographic face of a smiling young boy onto its hull. It introduces itself as Nazareno, their pilot, sent to ferry them into the Enigma of Hours, and with that cheerful, unsettling greeting, Hadrian's team comes face to face with their first true exalted being. Nazareno, their spider-like exalted pilot, clanks aboard the Mistral's bridge with an unsettling politeness, steadying its massive metal body against walls and ceiling, while the crew watches in barely concealed horror. Even Valka looks disturbed. No one knows whether something human still exists inside that shell of articulated arms and glowing red eyes, or whether the smiling boy's face projected on its hull is merely a mask, worn by a pure machine. With an almost casual confidence, Nazareno reveals it has already infiltrated the Mistral's entire datasphere, which is how it approached undetected by every sensor on the ship. Captain Corvo, to her credit, holds her nerve and grants the creature control. Then the stars simply vanish. The Mistral plunges into absolute darkness as it enters the Enigma of Hours, a cigar-shaped vessel perhaps 100 miles long, its open forward section containing an entire city of towers and glowing streets. It is staggering in scale, dwarfing anything the Mandaree Consortium has ever built. Nazareno delivers its pre-recorded passenger rules with board efficiency, the most chilling being summary disembarkation. Ejection into open space without warning for any violation. But the truly stunning revelation comes last. The journey to Vorgossos will take only 3 weeks, implying speeds of several thousand times light, far beyond anything in the Imperial fleet. As a metallic boom signals their docking and an inspection team prepares to board, Nazareno offers its cheerful farewell, and the crew of the Mistral begins to grasp just how far beyond their understanding the Exalted truly operate. 3 days into their journey aboard the Enigma of Hours, now hurtling through warp at 9,000 times the speed of light, Hadrian pauses on the stairs to the observatory and overhears a conversation he wasn't meant to catch. Switch confides to Captain Corvo that he thinks Hadrian is making a mistake, that betraying the Empire and sticking his neck out for a Cielcin demon simply isn't right. Corvo, ever practical, admits she shares some doubts but owes Hadrian for Bordelon, and if he wants Vorgossos, they'll go to Vorgossos. When Hadrian makes his presence known, the unease vanishes behind Switch's easy smile. A good actor, as always. Together they gaze out at the extraordinary sight of ships from across known space docked inside the Enigma, Durantine galleons, Jadian whale ships, even Imperial vessels, and a sleek Tavrosi craft from Valka's own people. Then Valka arrives with Polino and Tanaran, the towering Cielcin unfolding from the narrow stairwell to press its fingers against the glass in quiet wonder. The alien compares the Enigma to its own people's hollowed-out asteroid world ships, though it notes the Cielcin build inward in layers rather than open rings. But when Valka explains the Exalted are merchants, Tanaran recoils, hissing the word Hasimnka, the lowest untouchable caste in Cielcin society. To these beings, commerce itself is a kind of defilement, a detail that hints at just how differently the Cielcin see the world. Hadrian and Switch venture out onto the Enigma's concourse, a curving marketplace where traders from every corner of known space mingle beneath pale sconces and flickering holographs. Hadrian wears full combat armour but carries no weapon, honouring the Exalted's law, and he feels that absence keenly. The concourse is a riot of the familiar and the strange. Durantine captains walking alongside gaunt androids, Mandari merchants in tall hats, an extra-Solarian woman whose body has been replaced entirely with white porcelain selling vials of something that moves. Then Hadrian spots a shape that stops him cold, a squat, waddling figure in an orange mantle with green feathers on arms longer than its body. An Irchtani, one of the bird-like Xenobites whose people were befriended by Simeon the Red, the explorer Hadrian idolized as a boy. For a moment he is that boy again, rushing forward through the crowd to touch a piece of his childhood legends. But the press of bodies swallows the creature, and in the confusion Hadrian glimpses another impossible face, the slitted nostril, the wild hair, the green eyes of his dead tutor Gibson. He seizes the stranger's arm only to find an old man in a green jacket, frightened and confused. Those we have lost do not come back, but they travel with us all the same. Now separated from Switch and disoriented, Hadrian is approached by a fast-talking exalted barker named Marco, who leads him to a dismembered oracle called Jari, a being who drank from something called the Deeps, xenobiotic waters left by an ancient civilization, and came back able to perceive time itself. What follows is deeply unsettling. Jari looks at Hadrian and recoils, saying his past is broken, that there is a hole where his ship's records were erased. Then it quotes the exact dying words of Kat, the girl Hadrian buried in a canal beneath Borisovo, words he has never spoken to anyone. When Hadrian asks about his future, Jari convulses, screaming a single word, light, over and over, echoing the vision from Calaga of a black ship plunging into a sun. Marco ejects Hadrian violently, but the oracle's shrieking follows him out into the dark concourse, a prophecy he cannot yet understand but will not be able to forget. Rattled by the oracle's impossible knowledge of his past and its screaming visions of his future, Hadrian retreats to the Mistral for days, researching the deeps on the Enigma's datasphere, but finding little beyond what he already knows. He tells no one what happened, adding it to the growing list of things he keeps to himself. Valka coaxes him out to explore the concourse together, and their walk becomes something quietly revealing. Hadrian admits that the Exalted don't merely frighten him, they horrify him, this merging of human and machine that strikes at something deep in his imperial upbringing. Valka gently challenges his confidence in understanding Tanaran, reminding him that familiarity is not the same as true comprehension. She raises the question of his future beyond Vorgossos, echoing Ottavia's suggestion that he rebuild the Red Company as a fugitive. Then, in a bookshop of all places, surrounded by the comforting smell of aging paper, Valka shares something she has never told him before. As a young pilot in the orbital guard on Edda, she was ordered to destroy a hijacked ship carrying over 2,000 captives to prevent terrorists from smashing her world's orbital mirrors, and she obeyed. Every soul aboard was lost. She resigned the next day. This confession draws them closer than perhaps either expected. Two people who understand the terrible weight of decisions that cost innocent lives, finding in each other a rare and precious thing, someone who truly understands. After 3 weeks aboard the Enigma of Hours, the Mistral arrives at Vorgossos, and it is every bit as forbidding as its reputation promised. The planet orbits a dead brown dwarf star, a stillborn sun that barely glows, and its surface drifts just degrees above absolute zero, any atmosphere long since frozen to frost. The crew isn't even permitted to pilot their own ship. Without warning, the Mistral is seized by some unseen force and guided out of the Enigma in a silent procession, drawn toward the high tower, a single, impossibly thin spire of black adamant rising 40,000 miles from the planet's surface to a docking platform in the stars. When Hadrian and his team step through the airlock, they find no one waiting for them. No customs officers, no merchants, no guards. Just a vast, echoing hall of dark metal and ancient statues, watched over by 3 towering, faceless figures that seem to blend the forms of Cielcin and Exalted into something older and stranger than either. The silence is deliberate. They can feel the weight of surveillance pressing in, and when they try to regroup, the doors seal behind them, and all communications go dead. Vorgossos has swallowed them whole, and the only way now is deeper in. The descent into Vorgossos takes hours, the lift carriage crawling down its cable into absolute darkness. Hadrian dozes during the journey and slips into a disturbing dream. Dark waters closing around him, spectral hands seizing his wrists and ankles, and a voice calling his name, commanding him to listen. He wakes shaken but says nothing to his companions. When the carriage finally passes through an airlock and enters the planet's interior, what they find is staggering. A massive underground dome stretching miles wide, housing an entire hidden city of white stone towers, rivers, clouds, and even birds. It's eerily beautiful, but also deeply unsettling, because this city has no advertisements, no holographs, no vendors calling from corners. Hadrian recognizes the oppressive order immediately. It reminds him of his childhood home, Medua, where his father forbade any such displays. The people move quietly, eyes averted, clearly afraid. A desperate beggar woman named Shara approaches and offers to guide them, and when Hadrian asks about the ruler of Vorgossos, she confirms something extraordinary. The master of this place is Kharn Sagara, the king with 10,000 eyes, a figure who would be 15,000 years old. Before Hadrian can process this impossible claim, 30 faceless SOM guards surround the group, their corpse-like faces glowing with an inner light. And despite Hadrian identifying himself as an imperial diplomat, the lead guardian simply repeats its warning to disarm, then strikes. Hadrian awakens not in a dungeon, but on a velvet couch in a grand waiting hall, its fine furnishings at odds with the cracked concrete ceiling above. A kindly old Mandari nobleman named Baron Kimhe Song tends to him, and quickly recognizes Hadrian's connection to the Star Victoria peerage, a lineage that links him, however distantly, to the emperor himself. But Hadrian's real concern is for his companions, and here the news is troubling. He was brought in alone, separated from Valka, Paleno, and the others. The hall, it turns out, is not a prison at all, but a waiting room filled with dozens of aging Palatine nobles, barons and marquises and grand dukes, all of whom have been waiting weeks or even months for an audience with the Undying. They are summoned at random by Kharn Sagara's android servant Yume, and in the meantime they simply wait. What brings them here is perhaps the most unsettling revelation of all. Baron Song explains that the Palatine body can only endure 700 or 800 years before the brain fails, regardless of how young other organs are kept. The Undying's legendary offer is a new body entirely, a fresh vessel grown to house the aging mind. Hadrian, stripped of his sword and unable to reach his friends, settles into this strange limbo, passing the days playing labyrinth chess with Song while the weight of his impossible mission presses quietly down upon him. Hadrian endures over 2 weeks of quiet torment in the Undying's waiting hall, deprived of any regular schedule of meals or sleep, the yellow light burning on without change, without mercy. He tries to speak with the android Yume when it appears to summon the elderly Baroness Harfleur, asking only to send a message to Valka and his companions, but Yume refuses him flatly, twice, with identical words and identical tone. Baron Song warns him that pressing the matter will only make his wait longer. And so Hadrian reads, working through histories and travellers' tales stored on his terminal, dwelling on Valka's research notes about the quiet ruins, turning over and over the Oracle Jari's impossible prophecy aboard the Enigma of Hours. He cannot stop thinking about it. That single word the seer screamed, light. The same light from his vision at Calagar, the black ship plunging into brightness. How could Jari have known? Then a kindly old countess strikes up conversation, and through gentle small talk she reveals the horrifying truth of why all these nobles have come to Vorgossos. The Undying doesn't merely extend their lives. He grows clone bodies, raises them as children, and then transfers the aging noble's consciousness into the fresh vessel. Hadrian is sickened, recognizing what these genteel, desperate people truly are, and he thinks of Goya's painting of Saturn devouring his son, that mad titan who knew his hunger was monstrous yet could not stop himself. Yume the android finally comes for Hadrian, leading him away from the waiting hall where he's spent weeks among those desperate aging nobles. Baron Song and the others protest, calling Hadrian only a child compared to them, insisting they should be taken first, but none dare physically stop the automaton, not when their deepest desires hang in the balance. And so Hadrian follows Yume down through a labyrinth of blank corridors and sealed doors, descending hundreds of steps deeper and deeper beneath Vorgossos, past empty galleries and abandoned dining halls, until all sense of direction is lost. They pass through a massive circular door bearing a carved image of a boy enthroned atop the ruins of a shattered machines, and Hadrian realizes with quiet certainty that this really is Kharn Sagara's domain, that the legends are true. Beyond the door, a monorail carries them out over an underground sea 5 miles below the city, the air thick with the briny smell of salt and alien plankton. Their destination hangs from the cavern ceiling like an inverted cathedral, a great white pyramid, inside which Hadrian finds himself utterly alone before a massive throne tangled with cables and hoses. And there sits Kharn Sagara, ageless and unwashed, his chest partly prosthetic, his dark eyes seeming to look through Hadrian rather than at him. What follows is a battle of wills fought with words and literary quotations. Hadrian pleads for help, contacting the Cielcin to negotiate peace. But Kharn dismisses him with cold nihilism, revealing he has traded with the Cielcin for 500 years, long before humanity even knew they existed. He declares lives meaningless, war eternal, and refuses to risk his arrangements. Hadrian argues passionately but cannot move him. Just as Yume begins escorting Hadrian away in defeat, Kharn calls him back, and in that deep voice, like grinding stone, orders Hadrian to bring the Cielcin Baitan Tanaran before him. A door has opened, however narrowly. Hadrian reunites with his companions after 23 days of separation, finding them all together in comfortable quarters rather than the isolated cells he'd feared. Polino, Switch, Krim, Ilex and Valka are relieved but full of questions, and Hadrian confirms what seems impossible. He has met Kharn Sagara himself. The Undying wishes to speak with Tanaran, the Cielcin prisoner still aboard the Mistral, but Vorgossos forbids all communications, which means someone must physically travel back up the orbital lift to retrieve the alien. Hadrian makes a calculated decision to stay behind alone, reasoning that if they all leave, Sagara will assume his bluff has been called and the fragile opening will close forever. By remaining at Sagara's mercy, he demonstrates the good faith their host doesn't believe they possess. Valka volunteers to accompany Switch back to fetch Tanaran, while the others reluctantly agree to go as well. Before they depart, Switch reveals how deeply Vorgossos has unsettled him, fearful of the diamond technology and questioning whether Hadrian himself might have been replaced by some replicate. His terror is genuine and raw. Then, in a quiet moment on the platform, Valka surprises Hadrian with an unexpected embrace, brief but tender, a gesture that lingers long after the monorail carries them all away into the dark, leaving Hadrian alone with only the android Yume for company. Left alone in Kharn Sagara's palace, Hadrian finds himself in strangely comfortable quarters, freshly prepared as though his 3-week vigil in the waiting hall never happened. The android Yume tends to him with impeccable courtesy, but refuses to say when Sagara will speak with him again, repeating only that the master will do so in his own time. And so Hadrian explores. The installation reveals itself as something ancient and military in origin, its concrete corridors cracked with unimaginable age, its blast doors and Spartan geometry speaking of a fortress built long before Kharn Sagara ever claimed it. Many rooms stand locked, but those that open are filled with extraordinary treasures, ancient legionnaire armor, priceless paintings, historical artifacts spanning millennia of human civilization. Deeper still, Hadrian discovers the Orchid Stair, a series of descending garden terraces bathed in artificial sunlight, alive with hummingbirds and flowers and falling water. At the very bottom, he finds a sealed door depicting a great tree with 2 serpents devouring a kneeling man, protected by a holographic lock he cannot bypass. Yume appears almost immediately, as if summoned by his discovery, and cryptically mentions that the gardens beyond are maintained for the children, a revelation that chills Hadrian when he thinks of the aging nobles upstairs, all seeking new bodies. Back in his quarters, he loses himself in wine, history, and a replica Van Gogh painting, finding brief escape from his burdens, until someone silently approaches from behind and wraps their arms around his neck. Hadrian discovers a beautiful woman waiting in his sleeping quarters, sent by Kharn Sagara as a so-called gift. Her name is Naia, a homunculus with oversized blue eyes and raven hair, designed to be the perfect courtesan, unable to refuse, unable even to conceive of refusal. Hadrian fights a fierce internal battle, recognizing what she is yet struggling against impulses engineered to overwhelm him. He thinks of Brevon's secretary Eva, that hobbled, obedient creature, and sees in Naia the same fundamental violation dressed in beauty rather than servitude. He tries to create distance by drawing her, but she moves too quickly, too deliberately, and for a moment his defenses nearly crumble entirely, until his fingers find a metallic implant behind her ear. A SOM implant, just like the ones controlling Kharn's guards. In that sickening instant, Hadrian realizes that Kharn Sagara himself has been watching through Naia's eyes the entire time, puppeting her body, orchestrating the seduction for his own amusement. The old lord's voice emerges through Naia's lips, taunting Hadrian, revealing that he deliberately modelled her to resemble Valka. Hadrian reclaims his sword and furiously ejects the puppet master from his quarters, but the sense of violation runs deep, not just for himself, but for the sleeping woman whose body was used without her knowledge or consent. After that deeply unsettling encounter with Naia, Hadrian spends a tormented night unable to sleep in the bed where it happened, scalding himself in the shower as if heat could burn away the memory, then wrapping himself in his old coat in the corner of the room like a man retreating to the only familiar thing he has left. He misses Jinan terribly, and that longing only deepens the wound. When sleep does find him, another prophetic dream carries him bodiless over deep water toward a broken arch, while that same mysterious voice from his first arrival on Vorgossos commands him to listen, before he suddenly gains weight and plummets toward the sea, waking with a start. The next day brings quiet despair. He imagines Valka and the others returning to the Mistral, and longs to abandon this foolish mission entirely, to wake up back home at Devil's Rest beneath his painted stars. He wrestles with questions of free will and choice, recognizing that Kharn's seduction through Naia was nothing more than a laboratory experiment, himself the rat in a sealed maze. Yet Hadrian finds something defiant in the fact that he chose to come here, chose to stay. When the android Hume arrives with food and a formal apology from Kharn, they share a curious exchange. Hume claims it cannot lie, insists there are no cameras in the suite, and calculates a 9% chance that Hadrian's companions will simply leave without him. Hadrian keeps his sword close and waits, knowing that everything now depends on Valka and Switch returning with Tanaran. Valka returns to Hadrian's quarters on Vorgossos, and the relief of seeing a familiar face after days alone in that unsettling place is almost overwhelming. She's brought Tanaran with her, the towering Cielcin priest hooded and cloaked, but she's come without any of the others. Atavia kept her people aboard the Mistral, deeply unnerved by Vorgossos' stranglehold on their ship's communications and navigation. Every vessel on the landing platform is locked down the same way. Kharn Sagara receives them immediately this time, and in that dim throne room beneath the sea, he speaks to Tanaran in fluent Cielcin, a language he claims not to have heard spoken by a Xenobite in 15,000 years. Tanaran recounts the story of its capture on Emesh, revealing something crucial. Its people came there on pilgrimage, seeking quiet ruins, having obtained the coordinates from a mysterious source called Aktarumu. Kharn listens, then makes his position devastatingly clear. He will contact Prince Aranata Otiolo to arrange Tanaran's return, but he will deal with the Cielcin prince directly, for profit, cutting Hadrian and Valka out entirely. When Hadrian desperately begs to stay and speak with Aranata himself, Kharn physically rises from his throne for the first time, revealing the ruined machinery of his body, and orders them to leave. Only Hadrian's mention of defying the imperial chantry gives the ancient lord pause, but his SOMs close in nonetheless, and the audience ends with Hadrian being dragged away. Back in the diplomatic suite, Hadrian and Valka sit with the remains of a meal between them, processing what feels like total defeat. Valka admits she was wrong about there being no danger here, and Hadrian confesses that coming all this way may have been for nothing, yet even as he says it, he doesn't quite believe it. If Kharn truly wanted them gone, they'd already be on their way. They discuss their isolation, cut off from the Mistral by layers of network encryption that even Valka's neural lace cannot penetrate, their ship locked down and their crew unable to help. Hadrian struggles with thoughts of Jinan, the memory of her firing on him as he fled the Balmung still raw beneath the surface, and Valka gently but firmly presses him on whether he's truly all right. Their conversation drifts to Kharn Sagara's terrible secret, how he grows clone children as replacement bodies for aging nobles seeking immortality, and to the mystery of Aktarumu, the unknown source from which Tanaran's people obtained coordinates to a mesh. Then Hadrian reveals something important. He's found a passage, the Orchid Stair, that may lead down to whatever lies beneath Vorgossos. And when he suggests they could find and access the diamond controlling the installation to free the Mistral and locate Tanaran, Valka considers the mad plan carefully and says yes. 3 days after Kharn Sagara dismissed them, Hadrian and Valka could wait no longer. They descended the Orchid Stair, that winding garden passage Hadrian had discovered earlier, to reach the locked gate leading deeper beneath Vorgossos. As they went down, the artificial light dimmed to a warm amber twilight, and something extraordinary drifted through the air. Tiny glowing creatures called Phasma Vigrandi, the fairy lights of Luin, settling on branches and flowers like living starlight. Hadrian was quietly undone by the sight, because he remembered Kat, his dear friend who died in the Borisovo Colosseum, who had always dreamed of seeing these very lights. The last story he ever told her was the legend of Kharn Sagara himself, how the ancient lord had conquered a daemon and made it his thrall. Now here he was, walking through Kat's fairy lights on the road to that same daemon's door. At the bottom of the stair, Valka worked her neural lace against the gate's security system, which turned out to be isolated from the main network and relatively simple to crack. The heavy door opened, but then something unsettling happened. One of Kharn's surveillance drones dropped dead at Hadrian's feet, and Valka confirmed she hadn't disabled it. Something else, some unknown third force within Vorgossos, had knocked out that eye. Neither of them knew what it meant, but there was no turning back now. They pressed forward together into the red-lit tunnel beyond the gate. Beyond the gate, Hadrian and Valka emerged into a natural cave system of pale stone and stalactites, where eyeless fish circled in shallow pools beneath a metal catwalk. They passed through a narrow fissure in the rock and stepped into something entirely unexpected, a hidden meadow with waist-high grass dotted with snowdrops and yellow sun stars, a river flowing through it, all enclosed beneath a ceiling of white stone. Beneath a great tree at the meadow's heart, they found a stone slab with a still warm teapot, 2 cups, and a Droger chessboard, as though someone had been sitting there only moments ago. Hadrian caught a glimpse of bright eyes watching from behind the tree, but the figure fled before he could identify it. They gave chase across the meadow and through a locked door that opened on its own, which was deeply unsettling given that Valka hadn't hacked it. Beyond lay a series of strange chambers. First a menagerie of exotic creatures in glass enclosures, then a rock garden with disturbing statues that felt organic rather than stone, one of which appeared to move and bled red when Hadrian touched it. Finally, they discovered abandoned children's dormitories with names written in Nipponese on the doors, confirming what Hume had mentioned about Kharn's clone children being raised in these hidden gardens. Then something seized Hadrian's mind, a telepathic presence, the same mysterious voice from his dreams, flooding him with a vision of corridors and passages leading down to a dark underground shore. Though Valka was understandably skeptical, Hadrian stood and declared with quiet certainty that he now knew exactly where they needed to go. Hadrian and Valka descended through the door his vision had revealed, and found themselves in a vast pillared hall that served as something far more disturbing than any laboratory. Hanging from ribbed arches like fruit from unholy trees were glass bell jars, each the size of a sarcophagus, and inside each one floated a child. Suspended in pinkish fluid, connected to hoses and electrodes, ranging from the smallest fetus to youths in full bloom. They were all different, male and female, pale and dark, yet Hadrian recognized shadows of the same face in every one of them. These were all Kharn Sagara, dozens of variant bodies grown and maintained for whenever the Undying needed a fresh vessel. Valka disagreed, suggesting they were clones for his clients, but Hadrian knew better. As they hurried toward the far exit, an eerie nursery rhyme drifted through the hall, sung in classical English, the ancient language of the scholiasts. Then the singer revealed itself. What Hadrian had mistaken for a parked industrial lifter rose on 8 massive black legs, a terrifying exalted guardian called Father Calvert, armoured in adamant that even high matter couldn't cut. Hadrian discovered he could only strike at the joints between the plates, severing one arm at the elbow. Valka used her neural lace to destabilize its legs, while shooting clone pods to create distractions, killing 2 sleeping children in the process. When the creature finally collapsed, 2 living clone children emerged from among the pillars, a teenage girl leading a young boy by the hand. The girl thrust out her chin with fierce pride and declared herself to be Kharn Sagara. Hadrian and Valka now stood face to face with the clone children of Kharn Sagara, a teenage girl named Suzuha and a young boy called Ren, both born and raised with the sole purpose of becoming their father's next body. What struck Hadrian most deeply was that they knew, they understood exactly what they were created for, and they accepted it willingly. Suzuha spoke with fierce pride, declaring that her time would come, that she and Ren would give their father everything, their voices sewn up in his own. When Valka offered them escape, they refused, unable to imagine life apart from the man who had made them to consume them. It was a moment that stirred an old memory in Hadrian. Gibson's lesson on the 8 forms of obedience, and the crucial distinction between devotion, which enslaves the devoted to their attachments, and compassion, which is the highest form because it demands no chains. These children were devoted utterly, and that devotion had already made them willing sacrifices. Father Calvert, the massive exalted guardian, then suggested taking the intruders to meet the Brethren, mysterious entities dwelling in the water beneath Vorgossos who predated even Kharn's rule. When Valka insisted the enormous crab machine couldn't fit through the narrow door ahead, Calvert cracked open his armoured shell to reveal what he truly was, a skeletal human remnant with metal limbs, who then demonstrated terrifying speed by vanishing and reappearing across the hall in an instant. The group pressed onward together, the children as reluctant guides, descending toward whatever ancient intelligence waited below. Hadrian followed Father Calvert down into the deepest darkness beneath Vorgossos, his high matter sword casting a faint bluish glow across raw concrete as they descended miles of winding stairs to reach a vast underground sea. Suzuha and little Ren came behind him, with Valka bringing up the rear, her weapon trained carefully on the children. Ancient lamps flickered to life as they passed, illuminating white moss hanging from flat rooftops like old men's beards, and then Hadrian saw it, the broken arch from his dreams, standing like a cast-off ring at the top of a seawall. He stepped beneath it and heard a voice speak directly into his mind, the same voice that had haunted his visions, saying simply, "You have come here." A stone pier stretched 1,000 feet into the black water, and despite Valka's desperate grip on his hand, and her warning that Calvert would kill him, Hadrian descended alone to walk that narrow spur of stone. He was right to be cautious, because Calvert did try to kill him, lunging with inhuman speed to hurl him into the abyss. But something white as corpse flesh shot from the water and seized the exalted mid-leap, a massive tendril ending in a swollen human hand. The voice declared that Hadrian was not for the little priest, and tossed Calvert aside like a broken doll. What spoke to Hadrian then was the Brethren, Americani artificial intelligence that had evolved far beyond its original silicon form, now a vast organic machine hybrid dwelling in the sea, using human neural tissue as its processing substrate. It was, in essence, one of the ancient machine lords that had nearly destroyed humanity during the Foundation War, the very enemy that William of Avalon had banished from Earth. And yet the Brethren had a message to deliver, not from itself, but from the quiet. It pulled Hadrian beneath the waves and flooded his mind with visions. He saw his own beheading at the hands of a terrible Cielcin lord crowned in silver, a figure 9 feet tall wielding a high matter sword. He saw branching futures stretching out like corridors, showing himself crowned on the solar throne in some, dead on a battlefield in others, and Valka woven through nearly all of them. The brethren revealed that the quiet are not extinct as everyone believes, but rather shout from one corner of time, drawing the present toward themselves to ensure their own creation. They had tampered with Hadrian's probability states, pruning his possible futures to guarantee he would arrive at this moment. When Hadrian demanded practical answers, the brethren told him Tanaran was held in Kharn's palace above, and that someone was coming whose arrival would force even the Undying to act. Then Kharn Sagara himself appeared at the broken arch, furious at the intrusion into his deepest sanctum. His drones moved to execute Hadrian and Valka, but the brethren destroyed them with its massive hands and communicated something privately to Kharn that stayed his wrath. Whatever it said convinced the ancient lord that these intruders were required. The SOMs seized Hadrian and Valka, and as they were carried away, the brethren whispered one final thing across the dark water, calling Hadrian by a name he did not yet recognize as his own, half-mortal. Hadrian and Valka found themselves locked in a freezing concrete cell deep beneath Vorgossos, stripped of weapons and equipment, left with nothing but stale ration bars and bitter water. Still soaking from his plunge into the underground sea, Hadrian struggled to process what the brethren had shown him. Visions of his own death at the hands of a mighty Cielcin lord, branching futures where he sat upon the solar throne or perished on distant battlefields, and the staggering claim that the quiet are not extinct, but are somehow calling out across time itself, shaping the present to ensure their own creation. When he finally recounted all of this to Valka, she surprised him entirely. Rather than dismissing his words with the scientific skepticism he'd come to expect, she listened without scorn, confirming that the deeps are real xenobiotic organisms found on roughly a dozen worlds in Upper Centaurus, left behind by a civilization far older than the quiet, capable of altering life at the atomic level. Then Valka discovered something impossible in that cell, a fragment of white shell, whiter than snow, whiter than anything Hadrian had ever seen. He recognized it instantly as a piece he had broken from a cradle during his vision, somehow made physically real, carried back from prophecy into his own hand. That small, impossible artifact changed everything. It meant the visions from both Caligar and the brethren were true, connected by the same ancient power. And when Hadrian asked what he was supposed to do, Valka took his hand and said simply, "We are fighting!" Hadrian and Valka endured roughly 10 days in that freezing cell before the heavy door ground open and Father Calvert appeared. The Exalted was a nightmarish figure, all metal limbs beneath a heavy cloak sporting new brushed steel legs to replace the ones Hadrian had severed during their earlier encounter. Calvert took obvious pleasure in tormenting them, describing in chilling detail how he could hijack their motor cortices, turn their own hands against them. He revealed he had once worked in the Emperor's High College and later researched for the Chantry's Choir, that dreaded institution responsible for the plagues and poisons that keep the Empire's worlds in line. But Calvert hadn't come merely to threaten. He'd come for their blood. He pinned Hadrian to the floor with inhuman strength, pressing an ampule to the cut on his cheek and drawing a sample, then did the same to Valka while she stood defiant and unafraid. The implications were devastating. With their genetic material, Calvert could create SOMs bearing their faces, enslaved copies of themselves. Hadrian tried to fight back, landing one solid punch before Calvert knocked him unconscious with a casual kick. When he woke, his head was cradled in Valka's lap, his wrist slashed by those taloned feet, a concussion throbbing behind his eyes. Valka had already bandaged him with supplies scrounged from the cell, and despite everything, her composure steadied him. She refused to take back the coat he'd draped over her, pressing water into his hands instead, a small, quiet kindness in the darkness. Months passed in that cold cell beneath Vorgossos, and slowly Hadrian healed from Calvert's concussion, his blurred vision sharpening, the pain in his skull fading to memory. Without his journal or pencils, he turned the mysterious white shell fragment over and over in the stark light, marvelling at how its colour was so impossibly pure that the mind rather rebelled to look at it, as though it were a hole in perception itself. And as the shock of their encounter with the brethren ebbed away, Despair crept in to fill its place. They had lost Tanaran, lost their connection to the Mistral, lost everything Hadrian had sacrificed to build. He paced and fretted while Valka sat cross-legged on the floor, calm as ever, reminding him that the brethren had said the Cielcin were coming, and that sometimes the only thing one can do is wait. To pass the endless hours, Hadrian scratched portraits into the soft concrete walls with a bent nail, drawing everyone he'd known and loved, while they talked quietly about freedom and purpose. He shared Gibson's old teaching that pure freedom is like drifting on an open sea without supplies or direction, that a meaningful life requires choosing constraints, sacrificing possibilities to aim at something worth becoming. Valka listened, challenged him, teased him about his drawing, and gently, persistently, she drew from him the admission he'd been resisting. When she reminded him that he'd called himself a soldier to Suzuha during their fight with Calvert, he couldn't quite deny it anymore. He wasn't a spice merchant, wasn't destined for a quiet Athenaeum. Whatever the quiet wanted from him, whatever lay ahead, he knew he had to see it through. The chapter ends with a small, tender moment, Valka asking him to draw her portrait, the one face conspicuously absent from his gallery of loved ones, a quiet invitation that transforms their cold prison, just for a moment, into something warmer. After months of cold imprisonment beneath Vorgossos, the heavy cell door finally grinds open, and it is Yume, the clockwork automaton, who stands waiting. The golem offers no explanation, only instructions to follow. Hadrian wakes Valka gently, and together they are marched through ancient ruins predating even the Empire, relics of the Foundation War when humanity fought the Mercani machines. As their tram ascends the cavern wall, Hadrian experiences another telepathic vision from the Brethren, that vast intelligence dwelling in the underground sea. It speaks in fragments and riddles, urging him to protect Kharn's clone children, warning that someone is coming, and delivering the cryptic phrase that Lucifer and Prometheus are the same, both rebels who brought forbidden knowledge to those beneath them. Valka pulls him back to reality, and they are led into Kharn Sagara's throne room, where the Undying announces a development in current affairs. Hadrian steels himself, expecting Prince Aranata and the Cielcin to stride through those doors. He is wrong. Instead, Bassander Lin enters in full imperial formal dress, backed by a column of legionnaires carrying the Emperor's standard. In a cold, officious voice, Bassander thanks Sagara for the return of these fugitives, and Hadrian understands with sinking certainty that the Empire has found him, and everything he fought for may now be lost. And so the confrontation unfolds in Kharn Sagara's throne room, with Hadrian and Bassander Lin trading barbs like old rivals who know exactly where to strike. Hadrian, gaunt and grimy after months of imprisonment, manages to land a pointed jab about Bassander's hand, the one he severed during their duel aboard the Balmung all those months ago. But beneath the sparring, the real drama is political. Bassander has struck a deal with Kharn Sagara, offering the Undying something he desperately needs: protection from the Imperial exposure in exchange for an introduction to the Cielcin. Valka, ever sharp, raises the critical question: how did Bassander find Vorgossos at all? He couldn't have followed them, and here Hadrian recalls the Brethren's cryptic warning from his vision during the tram ride up. Someone is coming, and we have allowed word to be sent. The ancient intelligence beneath Vorgossos deliberately leaked the coordinates, engineering this entire encounter. Kharn is furious but powerless, his 15,000-year sovereignty shattered by a single Imperial interceptor in orbit. When the manacles close around Hadrian's wrists, he fights like a caged animal, but Valka submits calmly, wisely. And yet Kharn's parting words carry unexpected comfort. The Brethren are never wrong. The Cielcin are coming to Vorgossos, which means Hadrian's peace mission lives on, even in chains. Hadrian finds himself transferred from one prison to another, now confined aboard the Imperial interceptor Schiavona under Bassander Lin's command. His clothes have been laundered, his cell is small but civilized, and yet the weight of what he's witnessed presses down on him. As their shuttle crossed to the ship, he beheld Kharn Sagara's personal vessel for the first time, a nightmarish craft hundreds of miles long, carved from iron or black stone, its hull covered with 1 billion unique statues of men and gods and angels. Hadrian recognized it instantly, from the Brethren's vision beneath Vorgossos and from his earlier experience at Caliga, confirming that those prophecies were terrifyingly real. But the chapter's true devastation comes when Jinan visits his cell. She plays Knight-Tribune Smythe's recorded orders, proving Hadrian acted under legitimate authority, yet this legal shield does nothing to heal the personal wound between them. Their confrontation turns physical, Jinan striking him while Hadrian refuses to hit back, absorbing her fury as something he's earned. And then she delivers the blow that cuts deepest of all. It was Switch, his oldest friend, who telegraphed their location to the Imperial fleet, claiming Hadrian had gone mad. Hadrian immediately connects this to the Brethren's cryptic warning that someone was coming, realizing the ancient intelligence permitted the message to escape Vorgossos' sealed communications. The chapter's title carries double meaning: Hadrian's treason against the Empire and Switch's treason against him. Bassander Lin sits across from Hadrian in the Scaevona's interrogation room, noting the bruises Jinan left on his face. What follows is a tense, measured exchange between two men who despise each other, yet find themselves bound by circumstance. Hadrian warns Bassander about Kharn Sagara's Mericani diamond, and suggests it was this ancient intelligence that allowed Switch to send his betrayal message through Vorgossos' sealed communications, a manipulation neither man fully understands. Bassander dismisses the danger, confident that one planet cannot stand against the Imperial legions, but Hadrian knows he is gravely underestimating Sagara's power. The conversation turns bitter as Bassander accuses Hadrian of murdering his men and maiming him during the escape from the Balmung, while Hadrian counters that he delivered exactly what the mission demanded, finding Vorgossos, Sagara, and the Cielcin connection. Then Bassander reveals what Switch told the Empire, that he believed their lives were all forfeit, that the Chantry would execute the Sim for proximity to machine diamonds, and that he came begging to save himself. This cuts Hadrian deeply, not for his own sake, but for the danger it places on everyone else. Polino, Krim, Siran, Atavia, people with no noble blood to shield them. Bassander confirms Valka will be released as a Tavrosi national, and that Hadrian's fate rests with Knight-Tribune Smythe rather than with him. Though he delivers a quiet, chilling promise that if Smythe is executed for her role in all this, Hadrian will never reach the scaffold. He'll simply disappear. The chapter ends with Hadrian released to armed escort, transferred to the Mistral under Sagara's lock and key, standing tall as he looks down at the man who holds his chains. Hadrian is escorted from the Scaevona through the vast interior of Kharn Sagara's colossal ship, the Demiurge, and the sheer scale of it staggers him. The hangar alone could swallow his childhood home at Devil's Rest, and the walls are carved with Gothic friezes of battling figures, their terrible faces gazing down with such oppressive weight that even the hardened legionnaires make warding gestures and whisper nervously to one another. They pass through a mouth-shaped opening in the wall, and follow a ghostly holograph line through black corridors where strange winds blow, some warm as breath, others cold as winter, until they emerge onto a glassed-in umbilical bridge stretching toward the Mistral. Hadrian is thrust through the airlock without ceremony, and there waiting for him are Polino, Krim, and Ilex, who embrace him with palpable relief. They learn Valka returned safely about half an hour before. Questions come flooding in about the mission, the Cielcin rendezvous, Kharn's diamond, but Hadrian is simply too exhausted, too overwhelmed by everything pressing down on him. The guilt of betraying the Empire and Jinan, the devastation of Switch's betrayal, the uncertainty of what comes next. Alone in his cabin, he accidentally triggers a holograph projector, and images of Jinan flood the room. Jinan laughing with champak blossoms in her hair, Jinan pressing her lips to his cheek on the grandma. He covers the projector with a crumpled tunic because he cannot bear to look, and lets sleep take him. Hadrian awakens aboard the Mistral, still fully clothed, to find Otavia Corvo at his door. He gives her a condensed account of what happened below the surface of Vorgossos, how Kharn Sagara refused to negotiate, how he and Valka spent roughly 4 months imprisoned in a freezing cell, and how they were ultimately captured trying to find Tanaran and unlock the ship. Otavia, for her part, reveals just how dire things were aboard the Mistral during those long months. Sagara never released control of the vessel. They couldn't operate their own airlocks, couldn't send communications, couldn't leave. She had to ration supplies and reduce the crew to a skeleton watch. When Hadrian asks whether her earlier offer still stands, the one about rebuilding the Red Company together, Otavia's warmth fades into grim honesty. She tells him plainly that his noble blood is the only thing keeping them all alive right now, and that neither of them may survive what's coming. Their conversation turns to Switch, and Hadrian learns that no one aboard even knew about the betrayal, until Bassander Lin's soldiers swept through the airlock. Switch had secretly cued a message on the telegraph, and somehow it got through. Hadrian suspects the Brethren allowed it. When Otavia gently presses him about what he intends to do, Hadrian admits he feels no anger left, only a grief beyond fury. He won't hurt Switch, but he cannot forgive him either. The chapter closes with Hadrian sensing the wind is changing around them, though he cannot yet say whether for better or worse. Hadrian finds a measure of peace in the Mistral's small gymnasium, sparring with Siran and Paulino after months of imprisonment beneath Vorgossos. The physical rhythm of boxing becomes a kind of meditation, letting everything fall away, until Switch walks through the door. He hadn't expected to find anyone there, and for a moment the two men simply stand frozen. What follows is one of the most painful confrontations in Hadrian's journey. Switch insists he was trying to save everyone by contacting Bassander Lin and the Imperial fleet, that he feared Hadrian and Valka were dead beneath Vorgossos, and that the crew would be next. But Hadrian sees it differently. Switch didn't just call for rescue. He told Bassander that Hadrian had gone mad, and in doing so he handed over the location of Vorgossos, turned the Mistral into a prison, and placed every life aboard at the mercy of an Imperial officer who had openly threatened to space Hadrian if he could. Paulino weighs in firmly on Hadrian's side, declaring what any soldier knows: you're loyal to your people first, your commanders second, and the Empire third. The others watch in silence as Hadrian, unable to summon rage and finding only grief, banishes Switch from the ship, calling him by his real name, William, to sever the bond between them. He never watches his oldest friend leave, reading the departure instead in the eyes of his companions. Knight-Tribune Smythe arrives aboard Kharn Sagara's colossal ship, the Demiurge, stepping off an Imperial shuttle with 4 decades of Legionnaires and her first officer, Sir William Crossflane. Smythe is a thoroughly unimpressive figure at first glance, sure. Short, broad, blunt and featured, bearing the surgical scars of her elevation from plebeian birth. She leans on a cane, and yet there is iron beneath that unassuming exterior. She greets Hadrian with pointed words, reminding him that Bassander was supposed to keep him on a leash, but acknowledges his actions may yet prove useful. She's brought a proper translator on Hauptmann's orders, someone who doesn't trust Hadrian, but she insists he prove his worth as an asset. The delegation then navigates the Demiurge's disorienting corridors, where gravity shifts at right angles and hallways bend into apparent abysses, until they reach Kharn's Hall of Blue Flames. There, the twin Kharns sit with their clone children, and negotiations over logistics begin. 5 Imperial freighters will deliver cargo as payment, their crews withdrawing afterward. Both Imperial and Cielcin parties will be quartered in separate bays under Kharn's neutral authority. Smythe then does something remarkable. She raises the future of Vorgossos itself, catching even Kharn off guard. She punctuates her exit with a trumpet flourish, a deliberate display of Imperial pageantry. But Hadrian understands what the others perhaps do not. Kharn Sagara has seen far prouder hosts and more fearsome armies across 15,000 years. They are not the first to contend with him, and they will not be the last. Hadrian finds himself seated in a tense meeting aboard the Scivona, Knight-Tribune Smythe's borrowed interceptor, where Bassander Lin makes his case for putting Hadrian in chains. The charges are real enough: treason, theft of a prisoner, conspiracy with extrasolarians, and contact with Americanii Daimon. But Smythe cuts through it all with pragmatic calm, declaring that justice is mitigated by circumstance, and that Hadrian's fate will wait until after the Cielcin negotiations. She needs his skills as a translator and his rapport with Tanaran, and no amount of Bassander's righteous fury will change that. A scholiast named Torvaro from the Chalcenterite order will serve as the primary translator, with Hadrian assisting rather than leading. Smythe makes it clear she won't repeat the mistakes of Amesh, where Hadrian manipulated his role as sole interpreter to pursue his own diplomatic instincts. When the conversation turns to Kharn Sagara, Hadrian raises a warning that unsettles them all. He explains that Vorgossos' communications were completely locked down, that Switch could never have sent those coordinates without the Brethren allowing it, meaning the ancient daimon, not Kharn, orchestrated the Empire's arrival. Smythe listens and quietly declares that Vorgossos must be destroyed. She then forces Hadrian and Bassander into an uneasy truce, and in a private moment afterward returns Hadrian's high matter sword to him, ordering him to have Corvo prepare the Mistral's crew. They may yet be needed. Hadrian is summoned to Kharn Sagara's bridge aboard the Demiurge, where he learns the Cielcin worldship has finally arrived. The projection well reveals its staggering scale, carved from a dwarf planet encrusted with towers and machinery, so massive that parking it near Vorgossos would require an orbital position around it. Hadrian is the only one awed, for Smythe, Crossflame and Kharn have all seen such things before. A Cielcin herald named Owalicom contacts Kharn, speaking on behalf of Prince Aranata Otiolo, and immediately protests the Imperial fleet's presence. Kharn smoothly deflects, calling the warships merely transport for the human representatives. Then comes the betrayal that shakes Hadrian to his core. Kharn announces he will gift the Cielcin 5,000 human slaves, and when Hadrian rounds on Smythe, she admits the terrible truth. She paid Kharn with 20,000 Imperial colonists from cryogenic storage. 20,000 sleeping men, women and children, traded as currency for this negotiation. Smythe defends the price as necessary to save quadrillions, but Hadrian can barely contain his fury. The herald demands to see Tanaran, and Kharn lies smoothly, claiming the captive is aboard the human ship and cannot be produced yet. After the transmission ends, Kharn reaches directly into Hadrian's mind, showing him visions of those frozen colonists in their caskets, deliberately deepening the wedge between Hadrian and his own empire. But Hadrian sees through the manipulation, and in a moment of quiet resolve, he chooses his side. Whatever humanity is, whatever monsters it produces, it is his to defend. The Imperial delegation assembles in full ceremonial splendor aboard the Demiurge's hangar bay to receive Prince Aranata Otiolo, and what emerges from that black Cielcin vessel is rather more terrifying than anyone expected. The prince is a giant, 9 feet tall and broad as 2 men, armoured in glass black plate with platinum-banded horns gleaming like a crown. 70 armed Cielcin guards fan out in a silent semicircle, white swords resting against their shoulders. But it is what follows Aranata that strikes the human silent. A mutilated woman in a silver collar dragged by a chain. Her hands have been surgically split so she can grasp nothing, her teeth filed to points, her body scarred beyond recognition, reshaped to resemble her captors. She serves as his translator, repeating every word in a voice brittle as flint. Negotiations begin badly and grow worse. Aranata demands the return of his property and interprets any condition placed upon that return as an insult to his supreme authority. When Crossflame mentions hostages, the prince strikes his translator to the ground, and Hadrian notices something no human has seen before. The attendant called Nabuta, who crouches to stroke the fallen girl's face, is Aranata's child. But the most devastating revelation comes last. When Hadrian speaks the Cielcin word for peace, he finally hears what it truly means. Kilite, submission. Back aboard the Sciavona, the Imperial delegation regroups after that devastating first encounter with Prince Aranata. Knight-Tribune Smythe is visibly haunted, not by the failed diplomacy, but by the fate of the colonists she traded to Kharn Sagara, seeing now in that mutilated translator girl a glimpse of what awaits the 20,000 souls she handed over. Even Bassander Lin, never one for sentiment, cannot contain his horror at what the Cielcin had done to that poor woman. Tor Varro, the Scholiast, outlines their negotiation strategy, proposing exactly what Hadrian himself once dreamed of at Emesh: ceasefire, trade agreements, introductions to other Cielcin clans. But hearing those same ideas now, after witnessing Cielcin brutality firsthand, they feel hollow to Hadrian, like a child's fantasy dissolving in morning light. Everything he once believed in sounds naive when spoken by someone else. Afterward, Varro pulls Hadrian aside with a pointed warning. He quotes back Hadrian's unauthorized words to Aranata, that lovely phrase about seeing with eyes unclouded, and firmly instructs him to stick to the official script. Their exchange turns philosophical, two men debating truth and duty, and Varro reveals himself as the something unusual for a Scholiast: physical, worldly, more gladiator than monk. But beneath the courtesy lies an unmistakable threat: comply or be removed from the mission entirely. While waiting aboard the Mistral for word from Sagara or Smythe, Hadrian falls into a dream, or perhaps a vision, where his dead tutor Tor Gibson appears at the foot of his bed. The old Scholiast, wild-haired and leaning on his cane as always, challenges Hadrian's growing despair with gentle but firm wisdom. When Hadrian complains that the burden is too much, Gibson strikes the bed with his cane and reminds him that reconciling humanity with the Cielcin was never meant to be easy. That struggle itself is what defines us. Their conversation deepens into a philosophical game. Gibson asks how one plays any game, and when Hadrian answers to win, the old man rebukes him. The real aim, Gibson insists, is to keep playing, to protect the true self beneath all the names and roles and allegiances. He strips away Hadrian's identities one by one: Palatine son, Myrmidon captain, until only the irreducible person remains, the part of the ship that Theseus himself could never replace. Then Gibson tells him the story of the Gordian knot, how Alexander, frustrated by its impossible complexity, simply drew his sword and cut it in two. The message is clear: stop trying to untangle every complication, stop agonizing over Switch's betrayal and Jinan's loss, and cut straight toward the mission that matters. Hadrian wakes alone, but carries a quiet revelation with him. Gibson may be long dead, yet he lives on within Hadrian, as do all the people who shaped him. We are the sum of our memories and the people we've known, and that knowledge survives every storm. The formal peace negotiations finally begin, held in a pavilion beneath a great tree inside Kharn Sagara's colossal ship, the Demiurge, in a garden that eerily replicates the one Hadrian explored on Vorgossos. Knight-Tribune Smythe leads the human delegation with Tor Varro translating, while Prince Aranata represents the Cielcin, flanked by young Nobuta and the herald Oalicon. The mutilated translator slave stands chained nearby. Smythe opens with a proposal for peace and an end to raids, but negotiations immediately falter when she suggests trade. Aranata erupts in fury at the word merchant, which among the Cielcin is a grave insult, revealing their culture views commerce as beneath contempt. Hadrian recognizes the problem. The Cielcin see only two modes of relationship: master and subject, with no framework for exchange between equals. Then something unexpected happens. Tanaran, the quiet Beitan, begins reciting sacred history, revealing that the Cielcin evolved underground, were guided by beings they call the Watchers, and cannot survive stellar radiation. Their world ship's thick ice coating isn't merely insulation, it's radiation shielding. Hadrian immediately grasps the strategic significance, whispering to Varro that this vulnerability could prove a powerful bargaining chip. But the deeper truth settles over him like a weight. The Cielcin word for peace, he has already learned, means submission. True understanding between these two species may be far more difficult than anyone imagined. After 3 exhausting days of negotiations that have gone nowhere, Hadrian returns to the Mistral and finds Valka sitting alone in the starboard gallery. What follows is one of the most revealing conversations between them. Hadrian confesses that he simply cannot bridge the gap between human and Cielcin thinking. The aliens understand objects and actions, concrete things like gravity and stone, but abstract concepts like hope, love, and fair exchange have no equivalent in their minds. Valka, ever the scientist, reminds him that language is rooted in biology, shaped by environment, and the Cielcin only resemble humans by coincidence. Their natures are fundamentally different. Hadrian admits his visions haunt him, showing futures filled with war and destruction, and he wonders whether failure here is inevitable. He lays himself bare, confessing he's lost Switch, lost Jinan, and that Bassander would happily see him dead. When he asks whether he's even a good man, Valka echoes his own words back to him from a conversation on the Enigma of Hours. The fact that he asked the question is itself a good sign. She thanks him for his kindness during their imprisonment beneath Vorgossos, for defending her against Calvert, for simply caring. And then, quietly, she tells him she doesn't want him to die. Before he can respond, Valka steps forward, pulls him close, and kisses him. It is the moment everything between them finally shifts, a bond forged through shared suffering and mutual respect, becoming something deeper, something neither of them can walk away from. The negotiations resume beneath the great tree in Kharn's garden, and this time Smythe executes Hadrian's strategy of showing the Cielcin exactly how vast humanity truly is. A holographic projection blooms above the table, the entire galaxy rendered in light, and when the full extent of human civilization illuminates in blue, tens of thousands of worlds, trillions of lives stretching across the spiral arms. Prince Aranata is visibly shaken. The idea is elegant in its simplicity. Since the Cielcin only respect power, show them power so overwhelming that peace becomes the rational choice. And for a moment it seems to work. Aranata whispers so many, in a voice thin with something approaching awe, but the moment passes quickly, because the fundamental problem remains. Every attempt to describe peaceful coexistence crashes against the Cielcin understanding of relationships as purely binary, master or slave, predator or prey. The word neutral baffles Aranata entirely. When the translator struggles to render mutually beneficial, the phrasing accidentally implies sexual servitude, and the prince lashes out, striking the slave girl with his talons. Hadrian rushes to help her, and in that brief contact she whispers the only human word she knows: "Kill me." The guard sees Hadrian. Aranata demands an apology, but Hadrian refuses, understanding that submission here would destroy everything. Kharn intervenes to prevent bloodshed, and Hadrian simply returns to his seat and invites the prince to sit, earning a grudging flicker of respect through sheer defiance. Knight-Tribune Smythe summons Hadrian for a late-night meeting aboard the Scavona, and over glasses of brandy, she presents a proposal that strikes at the very heart of everything he's fought for. Tor Varro has suggested appointing an apostle and ambassador to Prince Aranata's court, reasoning that flattery might succeed where logic has failed. Smythe wants Hadrian for the role, and, despite the romance of the idea, living among the Cielcin, learning their ways, answering the questions that have driven him since boyhood, he cannot ignore the danger. An ambassador might easily become a slave, cut up for Aranata's table or mutilated like that poor translator girl who whispered "kill me." Smythe reassures him he would have a retinue, guards, a ship, and Varro himself as advisor with the Red Company if they consent. But it's her final revelation that truly changes everything. As apostle, Hadrian would represent the Emperor directly, meaning briefings from Legion intelligence, scrutiny from the Holy Office, and possibly an audience with His Radiance himself. That prospect renders refusal unthinkable. Smythe plans to float the idea to Aranata without naming Hadrian specifically, testing receptiveness first. As Hadrian leaves, the narrator offers a haunting aside. Had he actually taken that posting, much evil might have been avoided. When Smythe formally proposes sending an emissary to live among the Cielcin, Prince Aranata's response is immediate and unsettling. He wants Hadrian specifically, calling him the Dark One who freed Tanaran from its torment. Hadrian counters by requesting Tanaran as the reciprocal exchange, but Aranata refuses outright, placing a possessive hand on Tanaran's neck and declaring the Beatan his prized possession. The negotiations reveal a fundamental gulf that no amount of careful diplomacy can bridge. The Cielcin language itself works against them, for in Aranata's mind, accepting Hadrian is not an exchange between equals, but simply receiving a gift, a possession to do with as he pleases. And here Hadrian makes a startling linguistic discovery that reshapes everything he thought he understood. The word Aranata uses for Nabuta, Uvatia, means fruit of the body. This mighty prince, always spoken of in the active masculine mode, carried and birthed the child himself. The Cielcin concepts of masculine and feminine stand at right angles to human understanding, not opposites but something altogether different. When Nabuta falls visibly ill and is escorted out, Aranata abruptly demands Hadrian be sent at once and departs. In the silence that follows, Hadrian asks permission to bring Valka to the next session for her xenological expertise, and surprisingly, it is Jinan, who has every reason to resent Valka, who speaks up in support. Smythe agrees. Hadrian finds himself wandering alone through Kharn's garden aboard the Demiurge, that impossible replica of the underground paradise from Vorgossos, transplanted somehow into this colossal ship. By a dark pool at the base of a hill, he encounters Suzuha and young Ren, Kharn Sagara's clone children, skipping stones across the water. What follows is a rare and revealing conversation, for Suzuha shares the history of the Merikani that even Hadrian's imperial education never taught him. The machines, she explains, were built by humanity, but eventually surpassed their creators, designing new humans whose minds were shaped entirely to serve them, men without chests, as Kharn calls them, stripped of love and creativity and duty. When humanity realized it was being replaced, the Foundation War began, devastating Earth itself. And the weapons forged during that war, weapons that can devour stars, crack worlds, and tear the fabric of space, remain stored at Vorgossos under Kharn's control. When Hadrian warns Suzuha that the Empire will destroy Vorgossos now that they've found it, she shows no fear at all, smiling with quiet menace and reminding him that her father commands those very weapons. Hadrian counters with humanity's history of defeating the machines once before, but standing alone by the dark water afterward, one senses his bravado rings rather hollow. The negotiations had reached their most frustrating impasse yet, with Prince Aranata demanding that Hadrian serve not as a peaceful emissary, but as a warrior fighting to conquer rival Cielcin clans. The Hasuraman, the Dorayeka, the Gadaritanu. Aranata dreamed of drinking the blood of the Kaleritan, and saw Hadrian as the instrument to deliver them. Smythe held firm, insisting the mission was ceasefire, not conquest, while Valka quietly noted the bitter irony that the Empire had done precisely this sort of thing before, funding separatists and pitting factions against one another in the Mathuran campaigns. Then, without warning, blinding red light flooded the garden from above. The Cielcin shrieked and threw themselves to the ground, their sensitive eyes overwhelmed even through the Demiurge's polarized glass. An unknown Imperial fleet had emerged from warp and was destroying the Cielcin world ship with antimatter weapons and nuclear bombardment, the massive Bahali Imnal Akura broken in mere seconds. Smythe was genuinely stunned, her composure shattered into bewildered silence. Kharn Sagara, enraged and believing himself betrayed, hurled Crossflame aside and seized Smythe by the jaw. And then, Bassander Lin stepped forward, coldly announced that Smythe knew nothing because this had always been the plan, and shot Kharn Sagara twice with his phase disruptor, killing the ancient lord of Vorgossos where he stood. In the immediate aftermath of Bassander's betrayal, everything fell apart at once. The Demiurge's lights died with Kharn Sagara, plunging the garden into darkness lit only by the nuclear glow of the shattered Cielcin world ship burning overhead. Kharn's clone children Ren and Suzuha collapsed into violent convulsions, suggesting his consciousness was already attempting to transfer into their young bodies. Hadrian found himself caught between warring impulses, standing physically between Bassander's raised disruptor and the grieving Prince Aranata, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage of his peace mission. When Aranata seized him with terrible claws, Bassander's shot forced the prince to release him, and the battle was joined in full. Cielcin's soldiers streaming forward, hurling their deadly Nahut serpent drones at the Imperial lines. Hadrian shattered Aranata's ceramic sword with his high matter blade, but couldn't bring himself to strike down the prince, a hesitation the narrator tells us would cost dearly in the chapters ahead. Instead, he made a desperate gamble for leverage, killing the Herald Oalicom and coaxing the prince's frightened child Nabuta to come with him as a potential hostage. He found the mutilated translator slave girl dead in the grass, a quiet image of broken hands that would haunt him forever. With Nabuta secured and handed off to Imperial soldiers, Hadrian turned back toward the chaos, searching for Knight-Tribune Smythe and whatever remained of the command structure. What followed was a desperate, harrowing retreat through the dark corridors of Kharn Sagara's colossal ship, the Demiurge. Hadrian and his companions found Smythe, Crossflame and Bassander holding a defensive line at the garden gate, with Cielcin forces pressing hard behind them. Tor Varro had managed to carry the convulsing Suzuha on his back, and Jinan still cradled the unconscious Ren in her arms, while 4 soldiers struggled to restrain the thrashing young Nabuta. Hadrian felt a quiet certainty stirring within him. Remembering the implant behind Kharn's ear, the way the old lord's consciousness had once moved behind Naia's eyes, he sensed that Kharn Sagara was not truly dead, but transferring himself into his clone children even now. There was no time to dwell on it. The Cielcin unleashed wave after wave of Nahute serpent drones, and a rear guard of hoplites turned without hesitation to hold the gate, sacrificing themselves so the others might escape. Hadrian would never learn their names, and that loss weighed on him deeply. The retreat became a blind stumble through the Demiurge's impossible geometry, where gravity shifted between corridors and stairs ran towards ceilings. Bassander took a wrong turning that led them onto catwalks above a vast hold containing 72 ancient Merikani superweapons, the terrible leviathans and behemoths that were the true source of Kharn's power, including the dreaded astrophage, chief among them all. 20 soldiers were lost before they found their way back. At last they reached the Shearvona's hangar, where Smythe ordered everyone aboard and positioned Centurion Vorgossos and Crossflame to hold the narrow doorway. Then the Cielcin brought heavy explosives. The first blast killed Vorgossos instantly. The second threw Hadrian bodily through the air. As Valka dragged him up the ramp, he looked back toward the shattered doorway for any sign of Smythe or Crossflame, and saw nothing but flames. Trapped aboard the Skirvona with just 73 survivors, Hadrian confirms what everyone feared. Smythe, Crossflame and Centurion Vorgossos are all dead. He turns his fury on Bassander Lin, the man whose betrayal shattered the peace and cost so many lives, shouting that every death lies on his shoulders. But there are more pressing concerns. Hadrian warns that the convulsing clone children, Ren and Suzuha, are not dying but transforming, as Kharn Sagara transfers his ancient consciousness into their young bodies, just as he has done for 15,000 years. The situation aboard is dire. The hangar doors won't open, the service umbilical is jammed, external communications are dead, and 400 Cielcin are already probing the hull outside. Hadrian proposes a daring plan. Someone slips out through the service umbilical, navigates the Demiurge's twisted corridors, and reaches the Mistral, where Octavia Corvo's 300 mercenaries wait ready, ordered out of Fugue by Smythe herself. If they can bring those reinforcements back, they'll catch the Cielcin in a pincer between 2 forces. Then something unexpected happens. Bassander Lin, who moments ago was the target of Hadrian's rage, steps forward and insists on leading the mission himself, taking responsibility, perhaps for the first time, for the catastrophe he set in motion. He gathers a small band of volunteers, Jinan among them, and departs with a quiet, almost broken dignity, pausing only when he calls for Lieutenant Greenlaw and realizes she too is dead. His parting words to Hadrian carry a dismissive sting. Talk to them. It's the only thing you're good for. With Bassander gone and the ship shuddering under Cielcin assault, Hadrian takes command of the desperate situation aboard the Skirvona. He first checks on Ren and Suzuha, Kharn Sagara's clone children, who lie unconscious with blue lights flickering behind their ears. Valka explains what's happening. Kharn is transferring his consciousness into their bodies via quantum telegraph, his ancient mind compiling itself into new brain tissue, a process that may produce subtle personality differences depending on the host. Meanwhile, the young Cielcin Nabuta stirs awake, calling out for its parent. Hadrian speaks gently to the frightened child, but his attention shifts when he learns the ship's holograph system can broadcast outside. He steps into the projection booth and appears before the Cielcin like a thunderbolt, demanding to speak with Prince Aranata. The negotiation that follows is harrowing. Hadrian offers a prisoner exchange Nebuta and Tanaran's companions for captured Imperial soldiers, but Aranata responds with savage violence, bisecting a legionnaire with Smythe's stolen high matter sword. Hadrian holds firm, playing for time while Bassander's team races toward the Mistral, and the cold, strategic part of him knows he only needs to keep talking. But Aranata escalates relentlessly, killing a second soldier, then seizing Sir William Crossflane, who bravely offers himself to spare others. The prince tears out Crossflane's throat with its teeth and swallows. Through all of this, Hadrian glimpses Reign Smythe on a stretcher among the prisoners, her face burned and eyes blinded, who manages to call out one final command: don't give in. When Smythe dies from her wounds and Aranata threatens to kill every remaining prisoner, Hadrian reaches a breaking point. Tanaran, trying to protect its master's child, assures Aranata that Hadrian is too weak, too much a coward to harm Nebuta. That word, coward, echoes through him like a verdict, and Hadrian makes a devastating choice, driving his sword through Nebuta's chest. Aranata's scream of grief is universal, understood across species. In its anguish, the prince orders its soldiers to devour the remaining prisoners and personally cuts Tanaran in two for advising wrongly. Hadrian switches off the holograph and whispers his family's ancient motto into the darkness: "Our swords shall play the orators for us." In the aftermath of killing Nebuta, Hadrian's hands won't stop shaking, smeared with the child's blood. Valka finds him crumbling against the corridor wall and offers her worn red kerchief, pressing her forehead to his while he struggles to breathe. She tells him plainly that he shouldn't have done it, that any hope of peace died with that child, and though Hadrian knows she's right, he also knows what he saw. Aranata devouring prisoners, Smythe torn apart, Crossflane's throat ripped open. There was no peace left to save. Their grief is interrupted by a terrible grinding conducted through the hull itself. Hundreds of Nahut drilling machines are boring through the Shirvona's titanium underside, and Commander Ciara, a young Palatine technician with no stomach for battle, confirms they'll break through eventually. Hadrian forms a desperate plan using the ship's floodlights to exploit Cielcin light sensitivity, and then Valka, drawing on her years as a Tavrosi ship captain, suggests something brilliant, venting the warp drive's helium coolant to create a freezing cloud of snow and vapour, a smokescreen that might also kill. With 200 soldiers against 400 Cielcin and Bassander's reinforcements 48 minutes overdue, Hadrian dons legionnaire armour and delivers a rallying speech that transforms these frightened survivors into something fierce. The ramp opens, the containment quench floods the bay with light and cold, and Hadrian leads the charge. The charge from the Shivona plunges Hadrian into a world of white fog and bitter cold, the vented helium turning moisture into a thick grave mist that settles over everything. His suit shifts to infrared, and the Cielcin appear as faint red flames against all that frozen blue, some already dead from the airless gas, though far fewer than hoped. Most wore respirators and pressed forward undaunted. The Nahut drones proved devastating, swarming down like metallic locusts, boring through ceramic armour to reach the blood beneath, and nearly half of Hadrian's 200 soldiers fall in that terrible opening exchange. Hadrian himself loses his sword twice in the chaos, nearly dies when a Cielcin pins him to the ground, and comes closest to the end when a Nahut latches onto his helmet and begins drilling toward his skull, blinding his visor and filling his world with nothing but grinding darkness. Then silence, a metallic thud, and the drone goes limp. Valka kneels over him, having done something remarkable. During all those months studying Tanaran's language aboard the Mistral, she wasn't simply learning words, she was deciphering Cielcin drone communications, and she found their kill switch. Every Nahute across the battlefield drops like a boned fish. With the drones neutralized, the tide finally turns when Bassander Lin arrives through the far door with the Red Company mercenaries, catching the Cielcin in a devastating pincer. The enemy breaks and retreats, and Hadrian, battered but standing, pushes forward with his reunited companions to hunt Prince Aranata. The pursuit leads Hadrian and his companions back through the garden aboard the Demiurge, only now the trees are burning, and Kharn Sagara's SOMs lie motionless beneath the smoking boughs, their strange light extinguished. Through the massive skylight overhead, the shattered remains of the Cielcin worldship drift apart like a broken moon, its emergency lights still flickering in a world that has already ended. Bassander Lin, bloodied and battered, pushes forward to secure the far exit, but Hadrian voices the terrible thought forming in his mind. With Nabuta dead and the worldship destroyed, Prince Aranata has nothing left to lose, and a grieving parent with nothing left might choose to take everyone with them. The Cielcin spring their ambush just as Hadrian feared, attacking from both sides of the tree-lined path with grenades and Nahut drones, catching the Imperial forces in a devastating pincer. Valka once again saves them by broadcasting the drone kill signals she'd discovered, and the Nahut fall limp across the battlefield. But the fighting separates Hadrian's small group from the main force, and there on the rise overlooking the lake stands Prince Aranata, surrounded by its finest warriors, calling out for the one it names Belu, the Dark One. The prince orders its soldiers to kill everyone else, but demands Hadrian for itself, and what follows is a duel between two exhausted, grief-stricken beings who have each lost nearly everything. Aranata fights with terrifying skill, wielding the stolen High Matter sword that once belonged to Rain Smythe, and Hadrian, arms aching and legs failing after hours of battle, simply cannot match the alien prince's inhuman strength. Aranata seizes Hadrian's wrist, and with one devastating stroke severs his right arm, sword and all. Then, with casual contempt, it raises the blade and takes his head. Hadrian watches his own headless body fall, tastes blood, and then there is nothing but darkness and a profound, echoing quiet. And so Hadrian Marlowe dies. Not metaphorically, not in some poetic sense, but truly dies. His head severed by Prince Aranata's blade at the edge of that dark lake. What follows is something no living person should be able to describe. He drifts through an absolute darkness, stripped of name, memory, and identity, reduced to nothing more than a faint light carried along by invisible tides. Gradually, piece by piece, his memories return to him. The wind at this devil's rest, Gibson in his chair, Cat's laughter, Valka shivering beside him in their freezing cell. He knows who he is again, and he knows he is dead. Then he sees himself, or rather, the man he will become, a figure in magnificent black and red Imperial armor, bearing his red company crest, standing like a sentinel in the void. This future Hadrian doesn't speak. He simply points, directing him back toward life, back toward purpose. Hadrian reaches out and finds the mysterious shell fragment from his vision beneath Vorgossos, and when he grasps it, it tears a hole in the darkness through which light comes flooding in. He wakes lying in a shallow stream in the garden, his body restored but changed, his left arm now missing instead of his right, his sword somehow back in his hand. The quiet appears wearing Gibson's face, confirms plainly that Hadrian died, and offers only this explanation for bringing him back: "We are not done with you." When Hadrian asks what they want, two words echo through the clearing and through his mind before the apparition vanishes: to exist. And now we return to the battle still raging in the garden, seen this time through the eyes of those who watched Hadrian die. Valka's plasma pistol is nearly empty, her shield failing, yet she fights on alongside Paulino and Krim against Prince Aranata's remaining warriors. Paulino moves like a man half his age, his lance perfectly suited to keeping the towering Cielcin at bay, while Krim's throwing knives find their marks with quiet precision. But Aranata is coming, still carrying Hadrian's own sword, still stained with his blood, and when the prince corners Valka, her weapon clicks empty. She cannot move, cannot run, frozen by the memory of watching the man she loves beheaded before her eyes. Krim buys her a moment with a knife buried in the prince's palm, but Aranata simply draws Smythe's sword with its other hand and raises it for the killing blow. And then a blade erupts through the prince's chest from behind, splitting it open from navel to collarbone. Hadrian, impossibly alive, sweeps Aranata's head from its shoulders with a single stroke. The silence that follows is broken by the groaning of machinery as the Demiurge awakens around them, and hundreds of SOMs pour down the hillside, destroying every remaining Cielcin while flowing harmlessly around the human soldiers. Standing above it all in a golden robe is Suzuha, the new Kharn Sagara, commanding her father's army through the body he built for himself. Hadrian whispers for everyone to lower their weapons, and collapses into the arms of those he fought so hard to return to. Hadrian drifts in and out of consciousness for 19 days aboard the Demiurge, catching fleeting impressions of faces at his bedside. Valka's hand warm in his, Bassander's pale gold eyes, Polino's single blue one, and once impossibly green eyes with no face attached. When he finally wakes fully, he finds himself strapped to a medical bed, naked and threaded with tubes, facing something extraordinary, both Ren and Suzuha sitting before him, speaking with the same deep machine voice of Kharn Sagara. The Undying now inhabits two bodies simultaneously, an accident caused when Bassander's stunner bolt damaged Ren's implants during the consciousness transfer, forcing Kharn's mind to compile into both children at once. The original children, Kharn explains with unsettling calm, have simply gone to sleep. What strikes Hadrian most is how differently the ancient mind expresses itself through each young body. The boy radiates a manic, vicious energy, while the woman carries a cold assurance that Hadrian finds far more dangerous. But the true revelation comes when Hadrian looks down and discovers he has two arms again. Kharn has regrown his missing left arm as a gift of gratitude for protecting the children during the battle, just as the brethren prophesied he would. The bones are printed adamant lattice, the same material used in starship hulls, with carbon fullerene tendons, technically legal under Chantry law, though the Vorgossos' origin could invite suspicion of abomination. Then the conversation takes a deeper turn. Kharn presses Hadrian about his death and resurrection, desperate to understand what lies beyond, because for the first time in 15,000 years, the Undying tasted genuine mortality and felt afraid. The machines knew of the Quiet, Kharn reveals, and the Quiet may have guided King William himself through dreams to defeat the Mericani long ago. When Kharn finally asks whether death is truly the end, Hadrian can only offer the most honest answer imaginable. He has died, and even he doesn't know what happened to him. Hadrian prepares to leave the Demiurge at last, dressing himself in the very same clothes he wore when he first descended to Rustum all those chapters ago. The same black boots, the same red-striped trousers, the same tunic. Standing before the aquarium glass, he studies his own reflection, and touches his throat where Aranata's sword once severed his head from his body. He draws out the mysterious white shell fragment from his sabretache, noting it has somehow moved from the coat pocket where he last placed it, perhaps carried back with him from death itself. And here is the quiet heart of this moment. Hadrian recognizes that despite everything he has endured, imprisonment and betrayal, war and literal death, he is still himself. Every piece of him was stripped away and returned, and the man looking back from the glass is the same man who began this journey. He remembers the vision of his future self pointing him forward, and accepts that figure as something to aim for, a star to guide him. He also discovers Prince Aranata's ring among his belongings, rhodium set with a garnet rather than the expected blue stone, and places it on his thumb where his old burn scar once was. Lieutenant Kurtz escorts him to a shuttle, and as they pull away, the Demiurge begins to move. Kharn Sagara has received full payment. That colossal vessel, with its million carved statues of angels and devils, simply vanishes by unknown means, and Hadrian notes with quiet certainty that it will be a very long time before he sees it again. Hadrian is brought before First Strategos Titus Hauptmann, the Duke of Andernach, aboard his flagship, the Sieglinde. And this is the man who orchestrated everything. The ambush on the Cielcin fleet, Bassander Lin's assassination of Kharn Sagara, the destruction of those fragile peace negotiations Hadrian had fought so hard to build. Hauptmann is tall, grey-haired, grandfatherly in manner, with impressive mutton chops and a wax moustache, yet beneath that affable exterior lies the cold strategist who sacrificed Smythe and Crossflame, and countless others as acceptable losses. He asks Hadrian whether the Cielcin were truly close to a deal when his fleet attacked, and when Hadrian confirms they were, he simply says, "What's done is done." Yet Hadrian cannot entirely condemn him, because the strategy worked. 998 star systems lost, 60 billion lives taken by the Cielcin over 4 centuries. Hauptmann has been fighting this war since first contact, and from his perspective, annihilating an entire clan in one decisive stroke was a mercy compared to decades more of attrition. Then comes the true shock. Hauptmann reveals that the Emperor himself has responded to his recommendation, not merely granting Hadrian a knighthood and the Order of Merit, but inducting him into the Royal Victorian Knights, an elite order of fewer than 1,000 souls bound personally to House Avent. Hadrian is summoned to Forum to appear before his imperial radiance. He is given the Scavona and permission to bring his Red Company along, and just like that, the disinherited son of Devil's Rest finds himself called to stand before the most powerful man in the galaxy. And so the time comes to leave, to transfer from the familiar Mistral to the sleek Imperial Interceptor Scavona for the journey to Forum and the Emperor himself. But before they board, Valka pulls Hadrian aside, her eyes troubled. She's afraid, you see, because her neural lace, that Tavrosy computer woven through her brain, would be dangerously conspicuous in the shining heart of imperial power, where the Chantry holds absolute authority over such things. Hadrian reassures her gently, reminding her that her Tavrosy citizenship offers protection, and she relents with a kiss that draws cheerful hollers from the Red Company soldiers waiting to board. His companions gather around him then, warmly teasing him about his new title as a Royal Victorian Knight. These people who have become his family through fire and grief and impossible distance. Polino, Elara, Siran showing her first smile since Gen's death, Krim and Ilex, and Valka most of all. But there is one more figure waiting. Switch, his oldest friend, come to seek forgiveness, and Hadrian cannot give it. In a devastating private confrontation, he lays bare the chain of consequences that flowed from Switch's betrayal, every death, every failure, his own death and resurrection. He seals the airlock between them and weeps alone in the umbilical corridor, mourning not just their friendship, but every soul lost along the way. Hadrian returns to Valka after sealing the airlock on Switch, and she holds him without a word, understanding everything. In a tender moment, she voices the fear that has been nagging at her, that perhaps he isn't truly Hadrian at all, but some clone of Kharn Sagara's making. Hadrian reassures her by producing the mysterious shell fragment, the one he carried back from death itself, connecting his resurrection to the ancient visions at Caliga, rather than to Sagara's cloning technology. Valka takes the shard with scholarly wonder, promising to study it. But their quiet moment is shattered by Bassander Lin, who steps onto the catwalk overlooking the cargo bay and does something extraordinary. He kneels. This proud, antagonistic captain who fought Hadrian at every turn now looks up at him with something close to reverence, declaring his death and return a miracle, perhaps even a sign that Hadrian is the one destined to end the Cielcin War. The soldiers below take notice, and from the crowd a voice calls out that he's half-mortal, and suddenly the word transforms into a name. Half-mortal. The same name the brethren whispered beneath Vorgossos. It spreads through the bay like wildfire, soldiers and mercenaries raising their fists, chanting together. Hadrian stands above them, deeply uncomfortable with this worship, yet unable to stop it, sensing that Bassander's newfound devotion has set him on an irreversible path. The narrator's older voice confesses that this shining moment was only a foretaste of what lay ahead, his first steps toward Gododin, toward light and fire, and an ending he could not yet see. And so, we leave Hadrian Marlowe there, walking arm in arm with Jinan through the cold Rustum night, two people finding warmth in one another amidst a universe that asks rather too much of them both. It's been quite a journey tonight, hasn't it? We've drifted through 48 years of frozen sleep, wandered the strange improvised streets of Arslan, and sat with Hadrian as he wrestled with grief and purpose and the stubborn, quiet hope that peace might still be possible. There's something rather lovely about that, I think. A man who has seen so much violence, who carries the weight of every life lost along the way, and yet still believes that talking to one's enemies is worth the attempt, that a conversation might accomplish what a sword cannot. We watched him lose Gen, face a creature out of nightmare, and somehow find his way back to the people who matter most. And in that small dinner aboard the Balmung, Surrounded by friends sharing fond and silly stories, we saw something true, that the people we love become the stories we tell about them, and those stories keep them close, even when they're gone. Hadrian's path stretches on ahead of him, toward Vorgossos and whatever waits in that sunless place. But that's a tale for another evening, another time when you might like some company as you drift off to sleep. For now, let the story settle gently around you like a blanket. Let the characters rest as you rest. The stars above Rustum are quiet tonight, and there's nothing more that needs doing, nothing more that needs thinking about. If you enjoyed spending this time together, perhaps you might tap that subscribe button before you nod off. It's a small thing, but it does help these stories find their way to other listeners who might enjoy them just as much. But there's no rush, no hurry at all. The only thing that matters right now is this moment, this gentle quiet, and the slow, easy drift towards sleep. Sweet dreams, and good night.